Hey, quick question. Have you ever heard of Calloway? If you have, then you're probably not surprised that she owes me almost $100 over this. If you haven't, then I'm not gonna tell you who she is. I'm just gonna let her do it.
List of things I've been called: narcissist, grifter, criminal, scammer, the most easily baitable and easily cancelable person online.
What are the poster children for white privilege?
Toxic friend. My ex-best friend pitched a story to New York Magazine.
The more complex a villain she makes me, the more conflicted she makes her readers.
I'm currently publishing my response.
Everyone will read it. Everyone will write about it. Seriously, I've scammed people. Find a person who I've scammed. Find one person.
Yeah. That person would be me, so let's just get into it. Hi, I'm D'Angelo, and at this point, introducing myself would be like introducing William Shakespeare. Everyone already knows that my pin game is fire, and also I died in the 1600s. Anyway, thinking back, this pretty much started like any other video. The birds were chirping, the sun was shining, and I was just minding my own business on the internet. No, I wasn't, because if I ever did that, I wouldn't have a job. I was on the internet looking for business to mind, but I guess I should be careful what I wish for? What is the strangest rabbit hole you've accidentally fallen down on the internet? Ooh, time to accidentally fall down on purpose. Wait, this thread is from like 5 years ago, meaning everything in it will most likely be irrelevant now and a complete waste of my time. Just like I like it. Okay, so first up, a dude on YouTube who eats expired military rations.
Oh, they smell rancid as all heck.
Well, there goes my appetite. The Vampire Court of Austin, Texas. We do a lot of community outreach for the Austin community. Oh, that's nice. The court's preferred method of blood drinking is to use a lancet to prick the donor's finger. Oh, that's not. There goes my appetite part 2. Okay, an influencer who scammed her followers into paying for fake workshops. Oh yeah, I think I remember this story. Calloway. Let me see what she's up to now. Oh my god, what is literally any of this? And then after that, I may have accidentally gone through like 14 hours of video footage, 2 entire books, and so many articles and online posts that semantic satiation kicked in, and now the phrase Calloway doesn't sound like real words in my brain anymore. And needless to say, I have some opinions. So yeah, basically me reading a random internet comment from 5 years ago turned into the 2-hour deep dive video that you're watching now, which is... Of course it did. But before we get into that, let's get into today's sponsor. Today's video is sponsored by Opera. Opera desktop browser has everything you need. Fast, safe, and smart features all in one. With a VPN and ad blocker built in, one click is all it takes for smoother, safer browsing. You can hide your location and browse without tracking for free. No extensions or add-ons needed. It's easy to stay organized with collapsible tab islands and switchable workspaces to keep your context clear. As you can imagine, I'll take all the organizational features I can get when it comes to keeping up with my video research. From the sidebar, you can easily access everything from your music and messengers to Aria, your connected AI, all without leaving the browser or even switching tabs. Aria works in real time too, so you can get instant info about anything on your page. And these are just some of Opera's great features. Whether you're using Snapchat to get the perfect screenshot, enhancing blurry online videos with lucid mode, or even doing something as simple as customizing your wallpaper or activating the built-in battery saver, Opera gives you the privacy, security, and features to meet all of your web browsing needs, all without needing any additional extensions. Click the link in my description to check out Opera and get started with your smoother site surfing experience today. Now let's get into the video. Okay, so once upon a time, there was a girl named Calloway, and she only wanted one thing.
It's always been my dream to be a writer.
But unlike most writers, Caroline only ever wanted to write about one person, and that person was Calloway.
I've always wanted to be a famous memoirist.
Her childhood influences are pretty much the same as any kid born in the 90s.
I grew up reading books like Harry Potter and Artemis Fowl.
But while Ian Colfer and whoever wrote Harry Potter were giving her plenty of big ideas, Caroline just wanted to see someone a little bit more like herself leading these stories.
The one thing I wanted more than anything in the world was a book about a girl in these worlds.
And as much as she loved these stories, she was like, what if they went harder though? She couldn't help but feel like they were missing something. We were busy looking for wizards and elves, but Caroline was looking for the truth.
Growing up, I loved series of books, but there are no series of books that are true. They're all fantasy.
And so her dream became even bigger. She didn't just want to write books. She wanted to live a life worth writing about. And honestly, I think that's a pretty fantastic goal.
Part of the dream for me was actually doing the stuff that I wanted to write about.
So even from an early age, the aesthetic began to take shape. Obviously, Caroline couldn't quite count on the Hogwarts acceptance letter, but what if she could go straight to the source? The vibes of both Harry Potter and Artemis Fowl are rooted in the real world after all, so maybe she could just go find the magic for herself in a life-imitating art sort of way.
What if you could write about these worlds, these castles, these parties in New York, but it was real and the characters were real and all of it happened? Like, I just wanted that more than anything.
Now, it would be a long way from Northern Virginia to the esteemed halls of the universities that inspired the wizarding world, but she was determined to make it there.
I wanted to write about the things that happened to me at elite institutions.
But the dreams didn't end there either. Why not inspire the next generation of writers while she's at it?
What I want is to make a book that's like taught in schools someday.
In fact, why settle for now when you can live forever?
I want to be like a figure that lives on.
There's no other way to put it. Caroline Calloway wanted to write a masterpiece.
When I die, I want to be remembered as one of the great American writers. I want people to dress up for Halloween the same way they dress up as Frida Kahlo.
Frida Kahlo was of course neither American nor a writer, but you know what? I get it and I understand the vision. And honestly, the vision's great. I'm all for people following their dreams.
This is the dream that's just really important to my heart. So I went after it.
And I pursued it above all else.
So yeah, once upon a time, there was a girl named Caroline Calloway, and I think that as long as she stayed true to herself, there was basically nothing that could go wrong.
The number one thing you would need to explain who you are to people is to be honest, because if you lied about who you were, it would not be a book about you.
Nothing that could go extremely wrong so many times in a row for so many years. Now, if you want to live a fairy tale life, your first step is getting into fairy tale school. So where does our story take us then? Oxford University, which gave us Tolkien and C.S. Lewis? Or how about St. Andrews, where Prince William met Kate? I mean, how magical is that? Honestly, those would be great choices for an aspiring main character, but really, there was only ever one university in Caroline's heart.
I always thought that I'd go to Cambridge.
Cambridge University in England was the place for her, and always had been, ever since she was a kid.
My father, when I was little, always said, like, I can't wait to visit you in Cambridge someday.
The pesky thing about those elite universities, though, is that they're notoriously not known for being easy to get into, especially as an American student. It's not like Caroline could just wave a wand and wind up with Cambridge-worthy grades on her transcripts.
I applied to Cambridge 3 times over a period of 4 years.
But maybe the third time really is a charm, because while less illustrious people might have been deterred by the back-to-back rejections, Caroline got in, and what she saw there was beyond what even she could have imagined.
It's such a magical place, and I say that with like the wide-eyed sincerity that only an American can.
It turns out Cambridge really was the stuff of dreams, and not just the university either. The whole city of Cambridge was shaping up to be just the sort of setting that Caroline needed to get the creative juices flowing.
Even if you're eating an ice cream cone, it is the most fairy tale ice cream cone that has ever been eaten, because you have the backdrop of these sort of Disneyland storybook castles.
Through sheer determination, Caroline had basically manifested her way into the exact world she dreamed of ever since she was a kid.
There have been days when I've just like walked to class being like, just another day in Hogwarts.
In fact, her dreams might have come a little bit too true though. With so much to do and so much to see, she would have to make sure she stayed focused if she was going to find the time to write that book.
The beauty was intoxicating, and I did enjoy the eyeball pleasure of it all.
But she was about to find a reason for writing that she hadn't yet considered, trying to capture the feelings to share with her friends back home.
I'm still working on convincing my American friends that these things actually happen. Balls that, go on until 10 in the morning. 20-year-old boys who own top hats.
I mean, sure, there were fancy functions and black tie events back in the States, but Caroline was like, what if you could go fancier though?
I don't think Americans even know what white tie is.
And as it turns out, Caroline had already created the perfect place to share this new world a couple years prior.
I started my Instagram when I was 20.
And Instagram is not just about pictures.
I realized that Instagram has an incredibly high caption limit.
Could she kill 2 birds with 1 stone here? In fact, might Instagram offer even more advantages compared to a traditionally published book?
I don't have to wait for anything to get published to speak to people.
So Caroline began the merging of interests that would eventually catapult her to recognition. She followed her dreams of writing real stories about fantastical events in a magical world, but she did so in the captions of her posts. If Cambridge was her muse, then Instagram was her medium.
I tried to write all the stories all the details that you can't fit into that perfect, heavily filtered Instagram picture.
The Cambridge captions became longer and more elaborate, and before she knew it, @Calloway was actually starting to coalesce into a sort of newfangled live updating book, complete with characters, plot lines, and photo illustrations. This isn't an unheard of way to run a social media account, but in the early 2010s, it was quite timely.
There are a few flash forwards and flashbacks, and I jump around in time, which then was a very novel concept to do.
And audiences ate it up. Soon, hundreds of thousands of followers were tuning in for updates on her collegiate life. Through Caroline, they too were living the dream.
It was so Cambridge fairy tale, dark academia coded.
And you know what? Just because Caroline was popping off on IG doesn't mean she had to give up her dreams of being a published writer either. In fact, wouldn't the perfect time to release a book be now, when everyone is already tuning in?
The same voice that was like, go to Cambridge, live in a world of castles, like this is the place to be. That was the same voice that was like, make a book about it.
And so Caroline tells us that she did write a book. In fact, in 2015, she said it was done, needing only some standard copy editing.
I'm just finished my first book. It needs a lot of editing.
According to Caroline, she had achieved her dream of writing a real-life fantasy.
All autobiographical, all true.
And she was so very close to a happily ever after. And then she basically disappeared. And I'm not talking about your modern 2-week social media break either. For a full year and a half, there were no new posts on her Instagram account, and her book remained unreleased.
It had been like 18 months since I'd posted on Instagram, and my whole grid was just the fairy tale Cambridge stories.
In some ways, the Cambridge chapter that Caroline was writing on her Instagram was always destined to end at some point. But instead of culminating in the release of her memoir, the page kind of just ran out of ink once she graduated with her art history degree in 2016, and for the most part, nobody heard from her at all. Until they did.
I launched these creativity workshops.
She still wasn't posting any new photos on her account, but eagle-eyed fans knew that Caroline had actually been staying quite active this whole time on her Instagram stories. There, she had shared quite a few updates since Cambridge, but none would make as much of an impact as the day she came bearing $165 tickets to her creativity workshops that she planned to host across the US. And in true Caroline fashion, she promised that these workshops would be extravagant.
It was 6 hours. With it, you got wine, salad, cookies, coffee, goodie bags with all this stuff, little diaries that I had designed, tote bags, merch, flower seeds. God, I can't even remember what was in it.
But then in truer Caroline fashion, she realized that this may have all been a bit too extravagant for one person to handle. Perhaps across the US is a bit ambitious. All of a sudden, tour dates started disappearing. Maybe feeding a bunch of people wine and salad is a bit more expensive than it sounds. Now all of a sudden, you have to bring your own food. And so she began to update her audience as she changed and scaled back these promises, all from the ephemeral platform of her Instagram stories.
So I planned these events over Instagram stories that were constantly changing over the 6 weeks that I planned them.
But the problem with Instagram stories is that once they're gone, they're gone. So every update Caroline made was only available for 24 hours. And if you saw it, great. But if not, then you wouldn't be aware that you were no longer getting what you had initially paid for.
All the slides where I explained how the event was changing.
Yeah.
Just self-deleted and disappeared into the ether.
At this point, Caroline was changing locations, canceling workshop dates, trying to hire photographers and videographers without paying them, until people understandably pointed out that this is actually the worst thing ever, and she was even taking money for events and locations in which she hadn't even booked venues yet. And all of these updates had a 24-hour shelf life. And if this all kind of sounds like a recipe for disaster, let's just say that even though Caroline had navigated internet recognition for most of her adult life at this point, she was finally about to understand what it truly meant to go viral. But for all the wrong reasons. Thinking back, it almost makes perfect sense that Caroline went viral as a scam, because we were kind of in our scam era.
The Anna Delvey story had just come out that summer.
Anna Delvey, of course, was known for scamming her way across the wealthiest parts of New York by posing as a fake millionaire, and she was definitely having a moment.
And to make things unluckier, this was like 2 days after both of the Fire Festival documentaries had dropped.
And how could we forget the fraudulent fiasco that was Fire Festival? Basically, the blueprint for this kind of story was was fresh in our minds. And if there was ever a good time to take people's money to launch an overpriced event that turned out to not be what they paid for, this wasn't it.
Someone made a Twitter thread where they compared like things that I had promised and then the day of photos side by side.
The thread in question is only sitting around 11,000 likes nowadays, which is not quite viral by any means, but the internet was just getting started.
Business Insider, New York Magazine, and BuzzFeed all picked it up.
Caroline found herself as the internet's main character, at least as far as niche influencer drama goes, which is to say, actually not that many people cared about it, but the ones who did were very loud.
This influencer is the next Fire Festival scammer, like as a concept, went globally viral.
Translated into like more languages than I had the heart to count.
This was pretty much the first time Caroline had to deal with such a widespread level of criticism, so it stands to reason that she didn't know the golden rule of how to make people less mad on the internet. Basically, you can't. That's the rule. That's it.
I really think it only got so out of hand because I just handled it so poorly.
And I apologized, I refunded everyone, I canceled the tour, and that just made everything worse.
While she was definitely in a lose-lose situation here, I can't really say I feel sorry for her, seeing as the situation in question was completely of her own doing. And if anything, I feel sorry for her fans who were losing $165 until she decided to refund them.
Every single thing I did to try to make it right, Twitter just doubled down and used as proof of my evil and greed.
This is an interesting interpretation of events, seeing as Caroline herself admitted that greed was pretty much a key factor in why she took people's money for something she knew she hadn't yet finished planning. But creative interpretations are definitely her forte.
I really listened to the outrage of people who never would have bought a ticket in the first place.
And if you ask Caroline about it today, she'll tell you that the only people who were really upset about this were those on the outside. But that doesn't really change the fact that what she was doing, besides being quite unwise, was honestly just wrong on so many levels.
I, to this day, I'll die on the hill that I made a niche event for a niche demographic, and everyone who thought it was stupid were people who wouldn't have bought a ticket in the first place.
Thinking that creativity workshops are stupid is a subjective opinion, which makes it easy for her to dismiss. But it was pretty obvious that the real criticism she was getting was due to the broken promises, the attempts to source unpaid artists, and charging people money and then attempting to switch up the locations on them last minute, all in updates that they may not have even seen. But what of the people who did make it to these workshops?
The people who bought tickets and came to the events knew exactly what they were signing up for. They loved all the random inside joke gifts that I gave them. They loved the chaos of the whole thing. They loved the DIY-ness of it all.
To this day, Caroline maintains that all things considered, the workshops went just fine. And all things considered, they probably did. Honestly, if you follow someone closely enough to where you make it to an event that they didn't even promote in a post on their account, you were probably going to have fun regardless of whether you got free wine or not. But retconning the scenario as a great job is a bit generous to say the least.
I did a great job.
Literally one or two people ever wanted their money back because of how the event was changing.
So you see, none of this is really Caroline's fault. She even went on to launch another, more successful set of workshops afterwards, which she branded the scam. If anything, the real fault lies with the disgruntled person who posted the Twitter thread alerting people to these dodgy workshops in the first place, apparently.
She made it a criminal thing by comparing those screenshots.
For most people in the same scenario, I think that something like the workshop fiasco would wind up being less of a headline and more of a footnote as time goes on, but as you may be starting to pick up, Caroline Calloway is not like most other people. And for Caroline, the real headline hadn't even happened yet. Now, at this point, a few people who had met Caroline at meetups were starting to come forward with their stories, which didn't exactly sound like the most pleasant experiences for them.
I wrote an open letter to Caroline. I had started writing and freelancing for a few different outlets. Caroline Calloway isn't a scammer, she's just a self-obsessed mess.
There was a minor re-examination of her brand and what it represented as a whole, but one article in particular was about to change the trajectory of not just Caroline's internet career, but low-key her entire life. And if that sounds like a wee bit of an exaggeration, just you wait.
When all of this happened and I went viral as a scam, my ex-best friend Natalie sold this piece to The Cut.
So who the heck is Natalie? What exactly will she be bringing light to in her article for New York Magazine's online publication, The Cut? Well, whatever it is, Caroline found out before we did, and she was not happy about it.
I don't find out until August of that year when she emails me to let me know that she'll be writing about our friendship.
See, whereas the previously mentioned articles were all from people who had met Caroline after her rise to online prominence, Natalie and Caroline go way back, and Natalie had some stories to tell.
She really capitalized on my bad press and was like, let me tell you how much of a scammer this girl really is.
And Caroline was freaked out. It was to the point where she started trying to cover for the article before it even came out, which of course only made people more interested.
I just nonstop pushed that piece saying that it was going to be so explosive. I'm terrified of it. People were tagging the cut constantly, like begging for the piece to come out.
And come out it did. I was Caroline Calloway. 7 years after I met the infamous Instagram star, I'm ready to tell my side of the story. So here's Natalie's side of the story. According to Natalie, she met Caroline at her college, which was not Cambridge, but rather New York University back in the States. Before Caroline moved to Europe, before she pinned any of the captions that she became known for, Natalie said she actually already had a small yet notable following on this, at the time, new platform called Instagram.
Apparently, she had posted a color wheel of macarons that had landed on the favorites page, and now she had 50,000 followers, mostly teen girls who wanted a life like hers.
Natalie became an assistant/friend to Caroline, helping her shoot content for this account. They even traveled to Italy for content, each on their own dime, but then they missed their flights due to a weather fluke. These flights were non-refundable, so they had to buy new tickets. Caroline Calloway had new ticket kind of money, but Natalie Beach did not.
Caroline saved the day. She spoke the language, pretty cried in front of airport staff, and sat cross-legged on the floor of the Milan airport with her parents' credit cards fanned in front of her. I don't know how I'm going to be able to pay you back, I said. These flights cost more than my rent.
And while Caroline never asked for the money back, Natalie was determined to pay it off, so she offered to help edit Caroline's Instagram captions over the summer.
Our captions were mostly chirpy travelogues. Handmade spaghetti tossed with black truffle butter and Atlantic squid ink. It's how Venetian aristocrats do munchies.
Natalie and Caroline only worked together for that summer though, as Caroline flew off to Cambridge for her next semester. The two fell out of contact as it became clearer and clearer that they were living very different lives at that point.
Caroline continued to post daily from Cambridge without my help, growing her fan base internationally and making new posh friends. I submitted captions we had written together as work samples to corporate social media positions but never heard back.
Natalie was able to pick up odd jobs here and there, but soon a job opportunity would come knocking, from Caroline once again.
That September, I finally got the call. Caroline was back in New York, her book proposal was due after the weekend, and she needed my help.
Natalie accepted a position as a paid editor for Caroline's book. She would stay behind the scenes, but earn 35% of the profit on the work they created together. And not only were they able to whip up the proposal in just a few weeks, but it was good enough to get them a book deal.
It was a proposal for a memoir of a life that wasn't mine, adapted from Instagram captions. And I was proud.
They had a few $100,000 coming their way. All they had to do was write the book. And this is where things fall apart. Caroline starts getting second thoughts about writing, and she admits something to Natalie that changes the entire story.
She hadn't, in fact, gotten famous from a picture of macarons on Instagram's favorites page. The real story, she told me, is she took a series of meetings with literary professionals who informed her that no one would buy a memoir from a girl with no claim to fame and no fan base.
So Natalie claims that Caroline had allegedly bought tens of thousands of followers in the beginning and put out undisclosed ads to promote her account. This is shady in and of itself, but seeing as this follower count was part of the reason publishers were about to fork over so much money, Natalie couldn't help but worry.
This could ruin everything, I thought. We had sold the proposal based on a false number. Wouldn't there be consequences? If the bedrock of Caroline's Instagram account wasn't true, then was any of it?
But it turns out that it wouldn't matter in the end anyway, because this book never wound up materializing. Caroline was not writing. She started missing deadline after deadline until eventually the entire deal fell through altogether.
I pulled away and watched in real time on Instagram as she counted down the days until she missed the final deadline for her book contract.
For Natalie, that was the end of the story. Now, besides the fact that Caroline basically involved her in a massive lie and then co-signed a deal with her, and then failed to live up to her part of the bargain, causing Natalie to lose her job security overnight, it kind of just seems like Caroline might not have been that great of a friend in general. Natalie claimed that Caroline would lie about the smallest things. She would only ever call when she needed something. She accidentally locked Natalie out of their Airbnb overnight while on vacation and fell asleep at one point while Natalie had to find somewhere else to sleep at 2 a.m. in the morning. Caroline was just completely unreliable and wildly out of touch. Like, speaking of Airbnb, Natalie was actually getting evicted at one point, and so Caroline told her that she could stay in her apartment since Caroline wasn't even living there at the time.
But a week before I was supposed to move in, she called with a change of plans. Something about the value of gold having dropped and her family being low on money.
So instead of letting her live there for a reduced rate as they had previously agreed, Caroline changed her mind and rented it out as an Airbnb and tried to pay Natalie $200 a week to clean it instead.
$200 a week, which she assured me would be more than enough to rent some other place.
In New York? Tell me you've never had to pay your own rent without telling me you've never had to pay your own rent.
You're the only one of my friends who needs the money badly enough to take the job.
It sort of sounded like when you were Caroline Calloway's friend, everything was about Caroline Calloway all the time. Anytime she did anything wrong, she would start love bombing, so you'd come right back, and honestly, it sounds like she was basically what most people think influencers are like in real life. Overall, this was, as they say, not a good look for Caroline. But despite that, Natalie's pretty careful not to villainize her completely in this story.
I reached out to Cambridge about therapy, spoke with her mom about her prescription pill use. When she wore the same lace gown for 2.5 days, even sleeping in it, I forced her into the shower.
Like, she also paints a pretty complete picture of someone who's going through a lot of mental health struggles at the time. It's pretty clear that the story isn't just Caroline Calloway is a terrible person, like the other articles that were coming out. It was a pretty human portrait, and you get the feeling that Natalie was more interested in speaking up about her experience trying to navigate a very difficult friendship, as opposed to just trying to make Caroline seem like some sort of cartoon villain. And this makes sense when you read what Natalie said about it afterwards. When I think about it, the real impetus was trying to reclaim my own perspective and a narrative where I was very intentionally pushed to the sides of it. In the end, I don't think the story is quite as bad as Caroline made it sound. I mean, it made me feel sorry for her, if anything. But unfortunately, Caroline didn't even really have time to respond before things turned just completely tragic. Okay, so this is the part of the story where it stops being a story and it starts being a reminder that no matter how we feel about somebody online or the things they do, they still have a life outside their internet presence.
The last day I spoke to my father was the day that I got Natalie's email telling me that she would be writing for the Cut.
Unfortunately, Caroline learned that she lost her father almost immediately after the long-anticipated article came out. The timing of it is just unthinkable, but this wasn't a lie, this wasn't some play for sympathy. This happened, and I genuinely wish that it had not.
2 days after my ex-best friend tries to make me seem like this ditzy influencer, my father's rotting body is found.
As it turns out, the incident happened a few days before this article was published, but Caroline wouldn't learn of it until afterwards.
My father died of suicide the week that her article came out. I found out the day after Natalie's article came out.
I can't imagine what it's like to lose a parent in your 20s, and honestly, it's not our job to comment on anyone's grief or how they express it. Caroline Calloway posted online a lot after this happened, just so much content about her father, and I don't think I'm going to go through any of it, because seriously, the only comment I could ever think to make in this case is, I'm sorry that this happened. So this honestly does raise the question of, like, where does the story go from here? We could just keep powering through, but it didn't really feel right to me. In fact, I actually think it makes more sense to go back for a second. See, Natalie's article was presenting Caroline in a way that she herself never had, as someone not just fun and spontaneous, but someone who sort of alternated between being very unreliable and surprisingly driven. And what was really starting to stand out to me at this point was that Caroline Calloway is a real person. And that can be easy to forget, seeing as up to this point, she had been very intentionally flattening herself in her presentation. But after Natalie's article, there was a change in the way Caroline talked about herself. I think we all knew that the fairy tale presentation was a bit too good to be true, so let's see how Caroline tells the real story.
I started my Instagram account when I was at NYU, still being rejected from Cambridge, hadn't gotten in yet.
So yes, before Cambridge, there was actually another prestigious university. Caroline had mentioned NYU before, but she never really went into details until after Natalie's article came out.
I meet a girl in my creative writing course and I hire her. We sit around my apartment, we smoke weed, and we write little one-liners for my captions.
If one thing is clear, Natalie Beach wasn't lying about knowing Caroline. Despite the differences in how they interpret their time together, this time did happen.
Natalie and I worked together for 2 periods of 3 months over a period of 6 years, so 6 months total.
So that first 3-month period was in New York, pre-Cambridge. And after that, Caroline finally got her Hogwarts ticket, so off to Europe it was.
For the next 2 to 3 years, I fall out of touch with Natalie. I'm living life in England.
Caroline only spent a semester and a half at NYU, where she was basically prototyping the online presence that she would come to perfect and cultivate later. But much like Natalie alleged, that online presence wasn't going to get off the ground without a little artificial financial help. So as Caroline will tell you, she bought quite a few followers to start her account.
I bought 40,000 followers.
I think it was like less than $5.
Nowadays, she usually throws out 40,000 as the number, I think. And yes, she did buy 40,000 fake accounts initially, but then she bought more. So by 2014, it was actually more like 110,000 fake followers, which is so many. But either way, she had the follower account and now the stage was set.
I begin writing these captions about my life at Cambridge.
Every rom-com, it's the same thing. It's Hugh Grant, Julia Roberts. And I was like, this will sell.
So it wasn't exactly the case that Caroline just fell into her storybook life at Cambridge. After her unsuccessful account that she paid Natalie to help with, she knew she was going to have to switch up her content and give the people what they want. There was just one tiny problem though. None of the 110,000 people following her were actually people.
No one's reading these. In fact, I have to buy likes to keep up appearances. It is just going out to robots and robots are liking it.
So at this point, Caroline kind of solved the issue. She's got the followers, she's got the likes. I mean, it's all a big lie, but maybe it's one that publishers will fall for? But here's the thing, even if this does turn into a book deal, where are these readers going to come from?
I want to be famous because I want my books to reach the maximum number of readers.
You can't be one of the great American writers if nobody's reading your book. Caroline may have been trying the fake it till you make it approach at this point, but there was nothing fake about her ambitions of being taught in English class someday. So her online content strategy was going to have to get a bit more aggressive.
I wanted to build a business.
I took all of my Airbnb revenue and I put it into buying ads for myself on Instagram.
Caroline knew the number one secret about advertising. It doesn't really work unless you already want the thing that they're showing you. I mean, that's why ad tracking services are so aggressive when it comes to monitoring your online activity. If they can use what you do to guess what you want, then they just might be able to sell you even more of it. And Caroline knew that she needed people who wanted books.
I targeted fandoms of books.
The Fault in Our Stars was really big that summer.
The Hunger Games, Divergent was really big. Harry Potter was perfect with all the Cambridge stuff.
Any book series that had like a lot of mainstream appeal.
And it worked. It worked like a charm, actually. Content creators often like to lean into the narrative that online success is something that just happens to you. But the truth is, a lot of us are a lot more like Caroline than we'd like to admit.
My two greatest skills are marketing and writing.
Bootstrapping a successful social media ad campaign as a solo college student before it became super common to do this sort of thing is honestly kind of impressive. I mean, I'm not really sure if it counts as bootstrapping if you're running it with money that you're getting from renting out a place that your family is paying for, but you get the point. I do have to say though, the way she was running these ads was actually like super unethical. These weren't just like little ads that would show up between your Instagram posts as you scrolled. Caroline was actually paying book fandom accounts to post about her while hiding the fact that these were ads.
I would write in the voice of these book fandom accounts being like, this girl writes these amazing stories, like go follow her.
Creating ads and then not disclosing to the viewer that they are ads is wrong on so many levels, and many of these levels are legal. But again, Caroline was slightly ahead of her time, and so she likes to remind us that this all happened before the government updated its rules and regulations for how to disclose ads.
Before the FTA.
Now, the FTA is, of course, not a real government organization.
FTA, like Federal Trade Administration.
She obviously means the Federal Trade Commission, or FTC. And honestly, the fact that she can't even identify literally the only organization that we have to answer to as influencers leaves me wondering just how closely she's following their guidelines even to this day. But regardless, the ad campaign was a smash hit.
I had no idea how lightly I needed to like tap the gas pedal of like that whole American in Oxbridge ideal.
Despite the massive number of fake followers, Caroline finally had the engagement to back it up. And if there's one thing that's nice about running a social media account, it's that once it starts growing without promotion, you're pretty much set.
I was finally at a place where I was getting enough organic likes to start hitting the explore page. And by the time I got back to school that fall, my account was like ready to grow on its own.
So that is how Caroline Calloway got popular online. And you know what? I like this story a lot better. Sure, it has a bit more unethical ads and fake engagement to bait publishers, but it's a real story. But unfortunately, like all real stories, it wasn't without its dark moments. At Cambridge, Caroline was quick to highlight all the parts of her life that were glamorous and fun, but the truth of the matter is she was pretty much struggling her way through things the entire time.
I wish that I'd spent my time in these beautiful castles healthier.
She traces a lot of her issues back to her beginnings. Yes, the fantasy books and the big dreams were there, but that didn't mean she had the happiest childhood.
It was a very not castle-y beginning. I had a very mentally ill, unstable father who was also a genius, but had rage problems.
In fact, in many ways, her dreams were a reaction to the fact that she wasn't always happy as a kid.
I wanted to live my life in a world that I was not born into.
She might not have had much say in the beginning of her story, but she was determined to write the rest of it herself.
I sort of retreated into the stories I could tell myself as an only lonely child.
So when it came to Cambridge and those stories started to become reality, Caroline saw this as not just a chance to live her dreams, but her chance to change up the narrative as well.
I tried making a persona, and that was based on sort of things hiding what I felt shame about.
So if Caroline's early online presence seemed a little bit too perfect, that's because it was. Faking it till you make it might have worked from a business perspective, but anyone who's ever struggled with mental health knows that it's not quite that simple when it comes to how you feel.
I was trying to compensate for how tumultuous my interior world was and my mental health at the time.
And you know what? I want to make something clear. Unlike our other fabrications, I don't really consider this wrong. Honestly, creators don't owe anybody any details about their personal life. If Caroline wasn't comfortable posting about her mental health, then I'm glad she didn't. And it's not like what she was posting was completely made up either.
I was at Cambridge. I was wearing the ball gowns in the castles. I wasn't making that up, but I left out so much darkness that at a certain point it was truly lying by omission.
Different mental health issues often go hand in hand, and Caroline found herself dealing with multiple serious issues at once, none of which you could find a trace of online.
I left out my addiction to prescription pills. I left out my depression. I left out my generalized anxiety disorder.
But of all these issues, by far the most consistent struggle was the addiction she faced.
That addiction was it was really, really serious. And I was also dealing with, suicidal depression at the time.
Unfortunately, though, there is a pretty huge drawback to running an account completely based on portraying yourself as okay, when in reality, you're the furthest thing from it. You start to feel like even if you wanted to open up, you don't really have the right to.
At the time, I was being as vulnerable as I could to my audience.
And so it sort of got to a point where Caroline wasn't just posting perfection. She felt like she had to be perfect to keep up with what she was posting.
I was suffocated by the perfect image I had written myself into and then was forced to maintain.
And to make things worse, Caroline was about to get a big reason to stick to this inauthentic box she was in. 500,000 big reasons. So being an international student while throwing lavish parties is not much of an issue when your family is paying for literally everything. But it becomes a bit more of an issue when the checks stop clearing.
Senior year rolls around, dad can't pay tuition. Turns out he's in hundreds of thousands of dollars of credit card debt.
Tuition is already not a cheap affair for anyone, but seeing as Caroline had to pay international student rates, this was going to be an even bigger blow. All of a sudden, being a starry-eyed foreigner was more of a con than a pro.
Overnight, because I'm a foreign student, I'm paying $36,000, $38,000 US dollars in tuition per year.
But Caroline had never been this close to her dreams before, and she wasn't about to let this Cambridge story end over something as easy to acquire as money. She had already built the Instagram brand, and now it was just time to cash in. But she was going to have to bring in some help.
I need $36,000 yesterday.
I hire Natalie to help me immediately sell the book.
So now, a couple years later, Natalie is back in the picture. This would be the second period of 3 months that Caroline referred to, and together they write a book proposal based off of her Instagram to sell to publishers.
50% her words and 50% my words. This document that only publishers see.
Much like her online account, Caroline decides that the book should stick to the more lighthearted things in order to be an easier sell.
There's no Adderall in the book.
No Adderall, no mentally ill father.
This princess fairy tale best girl ever is living the best life because she's the best.
And much like Caroline's followers, the publishers found this lighthearted image very easy to buy into it. And buy into it they did, with Caroline getting a startlingly large book deal for someone who hadn't even finished their college degree yet.
Publishers were going crazy for it. A $500,000 book deal my senior year of college.
With the local and international book deals totaling $500,000, Caroline had only one question. Where do I sign?
I really just want that fucking money. And I want a big check to prove people wrong. I want tuition to stay in school. And I want money for my
bills.
She wasn't going to sweat the small stuff, like, you know, the fact that she had absolutely no intention of actually writing this book, and she knew this when she signed a $500,000 deal that her friend was also getting paid from.
I sold them a book I didn't want to write, and that was so up of me.
Now, like most big deals, this meant that Caroline was going to get some in advance and the rest upon completion of the book. So Natalie would get some money and the rest would be set aside for now, but this still left Caroline with $100,000 in pocket change. And at that time, this was probably the worst thing you could have handed her.
Industry standard in publishing to give 20% of the overall deal up front. And I spent my book advance like that.
Money to stay in school, bills, and proving people wrong turned out to be just a couple of the reasons that Caroline wanted the money. What she really used it for was keeping up with her lifestyle. And at this point, the bills were just getting bigger and bigger.
Addiction gets worse because now it's just so well funded.
I spent that $100,000 on things that would look great on my Instagram.
She spent the money the same way she spent her family's money, on whatever she wanted, whenever she wanted. Why limit yourself to Cambridge when you can travel all over Europe in a life of luxury?
On trips, on ball gowns.
On enough Adderall, $100,000 spends itself.
But Caroline was about to learn the difference between family money and money in the real world, because unless she could materialize that book she wasn't writing, those publishers were probably going to want that $100,000 back. Nowadays, Caroline will tell you that it's a good thing she never wrote her book. I mean, sure, to anyone else this might have seemed like the literal opportunity of a lifetime, but to Caroline, it was a compromise.
I realized that I had totally lost sight of why I wanted to be a writer, a memoirist in the first place.
The whole point of becoming a popular writer was to write about herself, not some girl she invented who's almost her. If anything, her book would have wound up being just like the one she wanted to do better than. Fascinating, but not quite true.
I am so glad that that book never existed because, you know, I'm sure people would have loved it and I'm sure it would have been a delightful, sugary little beach read for them, but it just would not have been true to my artistic vision.
And you know what? As an artist myself, this really made me think and ask myself some hard questions, like, would I betray my own artistic vision in this scenario? And the answer to that question is yes, because for $500,000, I wouldn't even have to think about it. I'd be sitting there writing my fake little stories like, this is not about you, this is about the money. But maybe the difference is that I have not always had money. Caroline, on the other hand, could afford to be choosy.
And I really didn't want to spend the rest of my life signing copies of a book that wasn't even about me.
So as she tells us, she decided against it, and the book deal was no more. Of course, this would have been a lot less of an issue if, you know, she hadn't already spent every single dollar that the publishers had given her for the book she didn't write.
I back out of my book deal, and I am broke as a joke.
Now, criticism aside, the good news here is that Caroline actually entered recovery at this point for the addiction she was facing at the time. But with the whirlwind dream she was living crashing to a halt overnight, there were still quite a few pieces to pick up.
I get out of the book deal,
Good.
then I get clean, then I have to deal with the shambles of my life around me.
So now instead of plus 100K, Caroline was officially minus 100K in the money department, and she needed money.
I owe the publishers $100,000.
Like, she seriously needed money.
I needed to make money because I was in $100,000 worth of debt.
Did I mention that she needed money?
I need money.
Yeah. I'm sure things will only go well from here. So this more grounded timeline actually brings us back to where we left off. Caroline needs money, and then she comes back to Instagram brandishing $165 tickets. The workshop goes viral, Natalie's article comes out, and now we're here. The birth of the book Scammer.
I'm currently publishing my response to Natalie's piece.
So a couple months after Natalie's piece, Caroline posts, in an actual Instagram post and not her stories, that she has started a book. Not only that, but she'll be self-publishing it the very next month, January 2020. She then reveals that this book is called Scammer. The antidote to shame is exposure, she says, going on pre-sale this January. This is then followed by the announcement of international pre-orders. So now people all over the world are free to give Caroline their money to hear her side of the story. But then it turns out, only those people will get to hear Caroline's side of the story, because she says the book won't be available in stores. If you don't pre-order it, you won't get to read it. It's that simple. January comes and goes, and all of a sudden, we don't have an exact release date. It could be as late as April. She then announces that March 1st is the last day you can buy Scammer. Or should I say March 2nd is the actual last day you can buy Scammer, and copies will be shipping out on time in early April 2020. Actually, no they won't because the pandemic. The manuscript is copy edited and ready to go, but our printers are not. This is of course not Caroline's fault because nothing ever is. She then offers refunds, but only if you're hurting financially during these uncertain times. And if this is all starting to remind you of her workshops a little bit, then yeah, join the club. Anyway, Caroline claimed that the book was finished, but we've heard her claim that the book was finished before, and look how that ended. And as you might be able to guess, Scammer did not in fact come out in early 2020. It didn't even come out in late 2020. It also did not come out in 2021. Or 2022. But now we're getting into spoilers. And as it turns out, people wouldn't even have to really wait that long to hear Caroline's side of the story after all, because she decided to do what worked back in the Cambridge days. Why wait for publishing when you can go straight to the source? So Caroline might not have been ready to publish Scammer, but for once, that didn't mean she wasn't writing.
It took me like 6-7 months to like recover from those twin disasters before I was like able to write something really good.
In March 2020, she uploaded I Am Caroline Calloway, her long-form essay response to Natalie's cut piece. Emphasis on the long-form part, by the way, because this essay comes in at over 20,000 words total, over 3 times as long as Natalie's article. Caroline published it herself, but made it look just like Natalie's article for the memes.
I had to pay like a web designer to like make a site that looked just like the cut and to like present all the text and photos like that.
She also paid the web designer to implement a paywall. So if you wanted to read her response, you'll have to pay $10. Unless of course you're still waiting on your copy of Scammer that was originally supposed to come out 2 months ago, in which case you get to read it for free. Anyway, I Am Caroline Calloway is an extremely tiresome, just borderline endless read, but it can be distilled to a few key interesting points. First off, she has some really great gems in there, like people can be born into material wealth and emotional poverty. I was. And if you are a freshman girl reading this in your college dorm room, some advice: don't let the fact that you are a freshman girl reading this in your college dorm room stop you from hiring the employees you need because you're not important enough. As if the average college freshman living on campus somehow has enough spare change to hire an entire human being. But let's be honest, Caroline knows what people really want. What does she have to say about Natalie, who she apparently described to her publisher as the only writer I've ever met who is my age and as talented as I am?
Everything she wrote about in her cut piece was true.
You might be surprised to find that Caroline doesn't really dispute anything. I don't think she contradicts a single one of Natalie's major claims. The things in I Was Caroline Calloway actually happened.
I'll be the first to admit, like, especially during my early 20s and then coupled with the Adderall addiction, like, I was a friend. I was like preoccupied. I lied.
But while Caroline doesn't dispute anything, she sure does try to excuse everything. Sure, she bought followers, but it wasn't that bad because it was 2013. To buy Instagram followers today, in 2020, is to make a morally bankrupt decision. But to buy Instagram followers in 2013 was a different kind of choice. Buying Instagram followers then would be like buying TikTok views today, without the existing framework of sponsored content. Sure, you could buy TikTok views, but how would you leverage that into any sort of long-term career or monetary value? This is pretty hilarious, seeing as she literally bought the followers in an attempt to leverage them into a long-term career and monetary value. Like, everything she ever did was to try to sell the book from the very beginning.
Before I came to Cambridge, I moved to New York for 2 years and tried, with 0 success, to sell the book I've now sold.
Also, she clearly didn't think her choice was that morally sound because she still hid the fake followers from Natalie for so long. I felt like if she knew about the fake followers, she would tell someone someday. That she did, Caroline. But the fact that she lied about this in the first place, essentially tricking Natalie into writing those early captions for an audience of nobody, is super lame. Anyway, the article covers a lot of ground, jumping from excuse to excuse, but where it gets really interesting to me is the part where Caroline shares private emails that she and Natalie exchanged in an attempt to prove that she had changed. The year before Caroline found out about Natalie's cut article, she had sent Natalie this long email where she's basically like, "Hey bestie, sorry for low-key being the worst person ever. Now I feel bad about it, so let's be friends again." I'm doing a wee bit of paraphrasing here, but when there's 20,000 words, you gotta take some liberties. You can pause the video if you want to read it. Anyway, Natalie responds and she's basically like, "I would prefer not to rekindle our friendship. Our time together was extremely painful and caused lasting emotional and financial damage. Good luck though." And Caroline was like, "You know what? Honestly, kudos for saying that, for spilling. But what makes this all so very weird is that Caroline tries to use this exchange to shame Natalie for not including the exchange in her cut article. I don't think an apology changes the past, but I also don't understand how you can write an essay in which a primary thesis is a certain character's lack of self-awareness and accountability and remorse and credit sharing while changing the past. Seems, what's the word? Unethical. And I really don't get how this is unethical. Caroline apologized every 2 lines in Natalie's original article. What is an unrelated apology years after the period Natalie was writing about really going to add to the story? But according to Caroline, the apology isn't changing the past. It's proof that she's changed now. It's hard to imagine the aloof, reckless, unaccountable character of Caroline Calloway and I Was Caroline Calloway sending these emails. In 2018, a year before I went viral as a scammer, and a year before Natalie's tell-all about me went viral too. It's honestly really easy to imagine her sending those emails though, because they're not great apologies. Like Caroline herself even says as much in a later email, saying, "When I first reached out to you about being friends again, I wasn't brave enough to take responsibility for all the ways I hurt you." So it's wild to me that she's trying to use this as proof that she did in fact take accountability. Overall, the essay was a wild read and quite the introduction to Caroline's particular style of writing. But in the end, it turns out that Caroline had told Natalie this the week before the article came out: "Write whatever you need to write. Your stories are yours to tell." So it stands to reason that there would be no long-term bad blood, right? Anyway, Caroline apparently made over $50,000 from people paying $10 to read this article. I remember getting to this part of the story and thinking like, whoa, she already earned back half of her $100,000 debt overnight? That was crazy fast. But I had those thoughts before I realized that when it comes to Caroline, things are never that simple, because you'll never guess what she actually did with the money.
I still owed my publishers $100,000, but the world was ending, so I just gave all the money to charity.
So Caroline had finally made some cash, and then she immediately gave it all away, which means she was still in 6-figure debt. Which is insane. I'm not donation shaming here. Donating to charity is good. But to do this with money that you technically don't have because you are in this massive debt because you wanted money to party is just very Caroline Calloway, as you're going to find out. So now Caroline needed money again, because despite having it, she spent it again. And so what ensued are so many get-rich-quick hijinks that I can't even really get into them all. Instead, let's just look at a greatest hits collection of all the things she tried to sell to her long-suffering audience. She sold pictures of Cambridge. Seeing as pictures of Cambridge were the reason she made her mark online in the first place, she decided to go the literal route by charging fans $40 for Polaroids she had taken. She sold individual pages from the book proposal that she wrote with Natalie. Sure, the book may never have materialized, but that doesn't mean she couldn't make some money. In these annotated pages, Caroline provides more details about the choices that she and Natalie made as they created the document. And speaking of Natalie, Caroline also started a Patreon with an $8 tier named Natalie. And the description for this Natalie tier is as follows: "You're a virgin with a low ponytail and an apartment that's sinking into the Gowanus Canal. You'd definitely sell out anyone for $5,000 if you haven't already." Clearly, someone was not quite over the cut article at this point. Anyway, she also sold cameos, which are short, personalized videos she would make for paying fans. Of course, Caroline, never one to pass up an opportunity for personal branding, called her videos Scamios and charged $100 each. Now you can wish your friends happy birthday Caroline Calloway style, aka you pay her money and she does the bare minimum. She also sold books. Caroline to this day has a huge book collection, and she decided to unhaul this collection at around $25 a piece, which for used books is pretty terrible, I'm not gonna lie. She also sold a book in multiple pieces. Why make $25 a pop when you can make $65 a page? Caroline took an art book that she did not create, cut out all of the pages, wrote text around them, and started selling them for $65 a piece as a flash sale. Not even the cover of the book was safe at this point. After gutting all the pages, she sold an empty cover of a book that no longer existed. How symbolic. She also sold original paintings. Caroline Calloway was now in her artiste era.
Since I love making art, The way I make money is that I sell visual art. I sell collages.
The paintings in question ranged from questionable portraits to still lives that she begged her audience to purchase, and not just her audience either. At one point, she was even tagging her IRL friends and begging them to buy her work as well. She also sold unoriginal paintings. Coming up with ideas is a lot of work when you can just use ideas that somebody else came up with for you. Thus, she took the figure from Henri Matisse's Blue Nude 4, made paper cutouts on painted backgrounds, and then sold these from $150 to $200 a piece. Never mind the fact that the quality control was non-existent and people were receiving wrinkled paintings that they paid hundreds of dollars for. She also sold used furniture. See, most people would sell something that's used for less money, but Caroline Calloway is an innovator, and she actually marked up the price of things that could be bought for half the cost elsewhere. Of course, you had to handle pickup yourself though. Basically, Caroline Calloway sold pretty much everything in what she referred to as a digital yard sale. There's no telling how much money she was getting at this point, but one thing was clear. There was absolutely nothing that Caroline would not attempt to sell you. But like everything, Caroline looked at the numbers and she was like, you know what? What if they went harder though? And thus came her biggest money-making scheme of all, and her most controversial. So Caroline was selling everything she could get her hands on at this point, but this wasn't working quickly enough. She had paywalled her essay, which of course gave her nearly half of the money she needed, but then she promptly gave that away to charity instead because of the pandemic. In fact, she actually took the essay down once she crossed the $50,000 mark, as she no longer wanted to spend money keeping the site running. So what's next then?
So I just stopped at 50,000, and then I started OnlyFans.
Behold the OnlyFans era. Now, obviously, unlike most of her previous entrepreneurial endeavors, we're obviously not going to be able to dive too deeply into the content in question. But the content was definitely questionable. I mean, on the surface, it was all still very Caroline Calloway.
I sold topless photos of myself dressed as literary heroines.
The caption would be 3 pages of
Really?
Orlando from Virginia Woolf.
I can definitely give her some points for originality, but she also makes it sound a lot more 4D chess than it actually was.
It's out, but make it books. I sort of thought of it as cerebral softcore.
It may sound like she was just posting racy pictures online, but this was actually part of her elaborate plan to post racy pictures online.
I was treating the OnlyFans sort of as performance art. I was low-key trolling these recent Princeton grad finance bros or whatever my demographic was.
And you know, if there's one consistent thing about Caroline at this point, is that she does know what works when it comes to getting people to give her money.
My OnlyFans is doing great. You should all subscribe to my OnlyFans.
Promoting your OnlyFans account during a Cambridge Union Society address is definitely a choice, but at that point, it's not even like she needed the promo. OnlyFans wasn't just going great. It actually became the most lucrative thing Caroline had ever done in her internet career up until that point.
I made mad money. I was actually on the top 0.3% of all creators on OnlyFans.
I mean, it's the internet, for crying out loud. What did you think was going to sell better, a book or a not safe for work cosplay of somebody else's book character?
It's actually demoralizing, how much people are paying to see me naked. It's not as much as they're paying to read my writing, so thank you, patriarchy.
And if you're wondering just how much the top 0.3% of OnlyFans creators were making at the time, try a cool $25,000 a month. This of course meant she would be able to pay back her publishers in record time, but she didn't.
I was making 25 grand a month, so I wish I could say I paid them back in 4 months. No, I paid them back in 8 months because I spent $100,000 on just random
Caroline's only two moods at this point seem to be spending money she doesn't have and not paying people money she does have. I mean, at least she finally did pay them back in the end, but the fact that she could have done so several times over before she actually did is just mind-boggling. But then again, why do silly things like paying your debt when you can do more fun things like buying art?
I just had money to burn. I was buying paintings, then I paid them back, then I quit OnlyFans.
This seems like a great time to bring up the fact that I do think the concept of debt is generally terrible in most cases. I actually really hate that you oftentimes have to incur massive debt to acquire things like education or housing or medical care. You know, things that people like to pretend are privileges, that way they can charge you for them, but they're honestly just basic human rights. So like student loan forgiveness, Great. We shouldn't need loans to be students in the first place. Like, capitalism is literally our personal dystopia. However, there's a huge difference between someone, say, struggling to pay off student loans that have been chasing them around, and Caroline, who frankly never should have accepted that money in the first place, and then had the money to pay it off, but deliberately chose not to again and again because she knew she would never face any real consequences. Anyway, I guess even Caroline knew that this had to end at some point because, again, she finally did pay them back. But even this was still massively problematic because the way she was making that money was just absolutely unhinged. See, OnlyFans itself is not the problem. If you're an adult and you choose to create your own adult content for other adults, I genuinely don't see what the problem would be there. It's all adult.
I quit OnlyFans because I enjoyed doing it, and then once I stopped enjoying doing it, as soon as my debt was paid, I stopped.
But the problem here starts to present itself when you consider the fact that not everything on Caroline's account was adult. In fact, several of the characters she was cosplaying as were explicitly described as children. For some reason, she thought it was appropriate to create NSFW content dressed as Joe March, Lux Lisbon, and Dolores Hayes, who are 15, 14, and 12 respectively. Now, this is the part where some people love to butt in with, but they're not real people. I mean, even Caroline herself states that all the characters are 28 when she plays them for OnlyFans, and it's like, okay, sure. I mean, we could talk about why you're going for adult representations of underage characters when there are in fact so many literary heroines that are not minors, but you know what? I'd rather talk about the real photos of children that she was posting to promote her OnlyFans account. The gray knee-high socks have already arrived, she tells us. And if you're cosplaying these characters as adults, then why are you wearing Hermione's school uniform? The fact that Caroline was making 5 figures a month off of this is honestly just disturbing. Again, she would stop at literally nothing to make a quick buck. And you know, at the very least, she doesn't seem to apply this logic to real people, so there's that, I guess.
I have to have a cutoff limit of boys that I can date. 20 is that number.
Except for the fact that her cutoff limit seems to be more of a con than a pro in her mind, seeing as she posted that her TikTok For You page is full of, quote, 15-year-olds that she has to pretend not to be attracted to. If one thing is becoming clear, boundaries are not part of her brand.
My mom was subscribed to my OnlyFans.
And with that, I think we can move on from the OnlyFans era. So at long last, Caroline has shaken off the debt that she owed her publishers. It was a long and painful road, mostly for me because I had to research all of this, but she finally can focus on writing her book, Scammer. Right? God, why do we keep doing this?
I was like, you know what? I think it's time to really get serious and write the book. Or I could move back to New York and just around for a year, and you'll never guess what I did.
I can't make this up. Instead of writing a book that she had been paid for, the second book that she had been paid for, this time by her audience, she decided she would just go live it up, but in New York this time instead of Europe. But see, she wasn't just trying to party all day. Once again, this was all part of Caroline's grand strategy.
So you know how in early 2021, coming off of the pandemic, my take on it is that the only people who went out during quarantine were people unafraid of getting canceled.
You didn't think we were going to get through this video without a traveling during the pandemic section, did you? I mean, come on, you guys. She is an influencer. So her plan was to be so outside during the pandemic that it ingratiated herself with the rest of this influencer crowd, who were, of course, very outside during the pandemic as well.
During the pandemic, there was this nightlife vacuum, and all the Dime Square people sort of took over. Club rat kids who genuinely just want to be cool, and if they get canceled, it's sort of if they get COVID, so be it.
I think the nightlife vacuum she's referring to is due to the fact that people maybe didn't want to die or cause others to die from the deadly virus that was about to sweep through the world. But none of that was going to stop Caroline from traveling to an exclusive nightclub in Germany months after COVID was being declared a national health emergency. And it's not like she didn't know, seeing as the t-shirt she wore during this outing said Corona. Anything for attention. Anything at all.
If I align myself with these people and have the right conversations in the right rooms, by putting my brand there, I will 3 chess moves ahead, put my book in a better cultural place when it comes out.
So yes, according to Caroline, getting in with the Dimes Square crowd, aka a group of trust fund kid macro influencers that has no relevance outside the New York bubble, was actually just a strategic move to better promote the book. You know, the book that she wasn't writing because she was too busy being an influencer.
I got what I needed out of brand realignment as like downtown it girl. Like I felt like I could coast on what I had there for a while.
Honestly, I don't even think Caroline was very successful at this. Like, as she's happy to tell you, she was featured in the Cut's It Girl issue. Yes, the very same publication that had published Natalie's article a few years prior.
I actually have no beef with The Cut right now. The fact that they put a photo of me on the same list with like a photo of Emily Ratajkowski and like Julia Fox, I'm like, apology accepted.
But how exactly was this going to translate to book sales, especially when the majority of her audience is probably completely unaware of the subculture that she was butting into in the first place? And the bigger question is, how would you even have time to do all of this and write a book at all?
I wish that I could live in downtown New York, feel like a pretty princess who goes to cool parties, and then also somehow find time in my schedule to make the best prose I'm humanly capable of.
Well, it turns out the answer is you can't live your book and write it too. So what exactly does it look like to live as a pretty princess who goes to cool parties? Like, we keep referencing Caroline spending all of this money, but what is she spending it on? Well, lucky for us, she's all too happy to show us exactly how you blow a check. Of course, all the parties she had at Cambridge were documented at length on her Instagram, but she didn't stop the fun just because she got the degree. One example is her 28th birthday party, which she dubbed the May Ball. Just this needlessly extravagant white tie costume party / celebration of excess, complete with wine, bouquets for everyone, the Center for Brooklyn History as the venue. And look, here's the thing. Usually, when it comes to people spending thousands and thousands of dollars on stupid things, I would just say, it's their money. But in this case, it is literally, objectively even, not Caroline's money. First, it was her publisher's money that she was spending. Then she took money for pre-orders for Scammer, another book she hadn't produced, and now she's spending that on parties.
I just haven't sat down and written it, and I've just partied and I've just like done these other money-making projects so that I'd have money for cute outfits to go to the parties.
And to live like this while simultaneously begging people to buy your paintings is just ridiculous. So no, in this case, I find myself quite compelled to comment on the things she's choosing to spend the money on. A reporter who went to one of her parties, this time at the Russian Samovar restaurant and bar, talks about rubbing shoulders with all the other affluent, high-profile people Caroline invited to the event, and reading it is honestly just frustrating. Caroline runs around handing out bouquets, doing paintings, doing drugs, etc. And it's like, okay, at this point, she has completely gotten lost in the sauce. Like, sure, she achieved the balls in New York, part of her dream where she gets to live it up and be the main character, but what's the point of literally any of this if you're not going to do step 2, which was write the book? It's like she learned absolutely nothing from the first time this incredibly specific exact same scenario happened. But like anybody who came from money and spends it like there are no repercussions, there were of course exactly 0 repercussions. But while money seemed like something she would never run out of, she couldn't shake the feeling that she might be running out of time. Caroline's New York fairy tale was about to come to an end, but why not throw in another minor scandal first?
I actually got offered a lot of money.
Caroline Calloway and offered a lot of money. Name a more disastrous duo at this point. So in July 2021, Caroline announced that she would now be selling snake oil. Literally, she launched a skincare product and named it snake oil because of course she did. And the words skincare product are doing a lot of heavy lifting here.
It really came down to the nitty-gritty of like, we give you this amount of money, and in return, like, you have to show up to be the face of the company.
So Caroline gets approached by a company to build this brand out, and she goes all in. For $75, you can buy an ounce, literally 1 ounce, of her homemade skincare product, which she apparently claimed was the fountain of youth. And much like everything Caroline has ever offered on the internet, some people actually bought it for some reason. Then again, I think I forfeited my right to judge at this point, so we're all in this together.
We sold at least like 5 figures bottles, tens of thousands, and only 4 people complained to the US government.
Now, pardon me for finding it a bit difficult to believe that tens of thousands of people were willing to shell out $75 for what was essentially a crumb of grapeseed oil at a 2000% markup. But some people definitely did buy it. Unless, of course, you were one of those pesky people who complained to the FTC or the FDA, not, mind you, the FTA. See, if you were one of those people, then Caroline thinks you actually did not buy it and you were just being a hater.
3 out of the 4, I was like, I don't think you even
bought this. I was like, I don't think you even tried this.
So what then were people complaining about? Well, you might think it has something to do with the fact that some of the product shots that Caroline posted had cat hair in them, and Caroline was bottling these on her floor and then encouraging people to put it on their face.
I have a cat, and I was bottling
And
all the
she's
snake
hairy.
oil by hand. You're lucky there wasn't more cat hair on the snake oil.
But actually, like most things Caroline Calloway, what I think was most reported was the fact that people simply weren't getting their snake oil in the first place. So obviously this business was short-lived and can only really be described as a disaster.
Snake oil's like no longer. It's discontinued. Like you couldn't buy it if you wanted to.
And as for why Caroline decided to strike up this deal despite having no interest in running a skincare line, well, it's the same reason she does literally anything. The almighty dollar.
I've done that before, like taking a lot of money for like a business thing that I'm just not passionate about.
You think? Anyway, people were really starting to get annoyed at this point. Snake oil and its failure to deliver were really starting to remind people of all the other things Caroline had failed to deliver, chief of which was this book that nobody had seen hide nor hair of at this point. Caroline had pushed the release date for Scammer into absolutely laughable territory.
I actually genuinely think it will take me like 3 to 6 years to make.
And so what then of all the people who had paid for this years ago and were under the impression that they would have received their copy back in 2020?
In 3 to 6 years when the book is done, and you know, some of those people will want refunds and we'll give them refunds.
I feel like I don't even have to say this, but this is an absolutely appalling way of handling people's money. This is the same thing she did with the workshops. You cannot tell people that they're going to get one thing, take their money, and then hold it hostage while you change the thing you said they were going to get and try to make up for it at the end by offering them refunds. Just don't take the money in the first place if you're not sure that you can deliver the things.
It's like, what's the worst that could happen? The refunds are late and they call me a scammer.
It's not about the
how will I
refunds, it's
survive?
about
She has the same attitude towards other people's money that she does towards her own. She genuinely seems to think it doesn't matter at all, and having it or not having it is no big deal. And that's because her own money is so rarely her own money.
I have pretty customer service. It's just me, but like I'm happy to refund you.
Refunds cover a multitude of sins, but to be this out of touch this many times in a row makes me think that Caroline will probably never get it. Or honestly, it makes me think that Caroline already gets it and she just genuinely does not care.
Get into my DMs. I check them constantly. I am in my responsible girl era right now.
But you know, maybe Caroline's reputation was starting to get to her because she actually did try to enter her responsible girl era after this. But in order to do so, she was going to have to make some big life changes. At this point, Caroline Calloway was known for everything but writing a book, and for someone who always wanted to be known as an author, this was never going to make her happy.
I was about to turn 30. It's been 10 years and I just realized that I just like around and just like partied, and I just like never got any writing done.
So she decided that her childhood dreams are going to have to take a bit of re-evaluating. Surely she could achieve all of them, but maybe aiming to achieve them simultaneously was a bit unrealistic.
If posting every day and being like a downtown socialite and producing a book were 3 things I could do at once, at some point over the last 10 years, like I would have figured it out.
I never found a way to make it work.
Thinking back to those childhood dreams, I'm sure we can all agree that live a life worth writing about definitely happened to her. Maybe not for any of the reasons that Caroline would have guessed when she was a kid, but certainly a noteworthy life all the same. So maybe, just maybe, it was time to finally do the writing part.
I'm leaving the internet / moving to TikTok.
Caroline decided that now was the time to switch things up. So goodbye Instagram, goodbye New York. She traded the bustling life of the Big Apple for a much quieter time among the white beaches of Sarasota, Florida, of all places. And to her credit, she actually stayed offline for the most part. No workshops on the IG stories this time. Things were actually fairly quiet.
We've all been wondering where the is Caroline Calloway, her internet disappearance, where's the book, why'd you move?
Creating a more distraction-free environment seems to have done Caroline a world of wonders. She was, for maybe the first time in her life, actually working on a book.
I made myself a rule that I would not leave this godforsaken city in Florida until I had a steady income from books.
I mean, it is worth noting that at one point in time, the majority of the land in this godforsaken city in question was owned by Caroline's great-grandfather, a real estate tycoon who built most of the city's developments. You know, just generational wealth things.
Now I just live here and I just read books and I don't post online and I just work on my writing.
Caroline had decided that not only would she write the book here, but she'd manufacture it as well, gluing the books into their covers with fancy Italian paper and individually numbered copies. Sure, people may be getting their books literally years late, but at least they were going to get them late in style.
I've just been so busy gluing books. I haven't seen like a movie or a TV show in like since in May or April.
Caroline even enlisted her mother for help, which I think is definitely a much more normal way to receive familiar support than, you know, an OnlyFans subscription.
I'm making my mom work on gluing these books together with me.
There were no more parties, there were no more publishers, there was nothing between Caroline and finally publishing her book, except for a tiny little lawsuit that was about to follow her all the way from the Big Apple to the Sunshine State. So a small detail from Caroline's time in New York wound up being revealed to the public, and I promise you, you cannot make this up.
I stopped paying rent my last year in New York.
Yes, you heard her correctly. She was going through the massive parties in her It Girl rebrand, all without paying a single dollar in rent money. All without paying $40,844 in rent money.
And I owed $40,000.
At first, she tried to take out a loan from the bank to cover her designer wardrobe and expensive get-togethers, since this was, after all part of her business strategy to sell more book copies or whatever. But when the bank didn't buy this excuse, because we live in the real world, she decided that the money had to come from somewhere.
And a bank wasn't going to give me $40,000 to buy clothes and party in New York, and so I just didn't pay rent for a year.
When I say Caroline Calloway's money is never Caroline Calloway's money, this is what I'm referring to. At this point, she was taking advantage of a legal moratorium that stopped people from being evicted during the pandemic. And obviously, I'm glad that this moratorium existed, but it's pretty clearly not meant for people in Caroline's situation. In her case, it's more of what we call a legal loophole. But believe it or not, that wasn't even the only thing this lawsuit was about.
So my landlord's suing me for $25,000 in damages.
Not only did Caroline leave her apartment without paying any of the last 12 months of rent, she also left her apartment completely trashed on her way out.
I think what really drove them over the edge was we just put all these photos of the apartment being trashed.
Moving to Florida is starting to sound a lot less like a creative decision and a lot more like running away. So why did she leave her apartment super trashed? Because of course she did. That's why.
So I did leave my apartment super trashed. I wouldn't have left it super trashed I probably would have left it super trashed either way.
Being able to afford such a blasé attitude towards literally everything in your life must be nice. But yeah, photos of Caroline's apartment actually wound up going somewhat viral online, solely due to the nightmare state that she left it in. The people who moved in afterwards made a tour of the place, and it can really only be described as a dump. It's to the point where I don't even know how Caroline managed to mess it up that badly.
She'd been documenting everything, and it's just what people picked up on.
But get this, instead of, feeling any sort of remorse, Caroline initially tried to counter the charges with her own lawsuit, and you'll never guess the reason she cited that she shouldn't have to pay a dime. I kid you not. Financial hardship. The pandemic prevented Miss Calloway from being able to earn an income for more than 2 years. Miss Calloway found herself in the position of being unable to afford rent. But she could afford the caviar though.
I used that money to party, and honestly, to this day, I think it was money well spent.
Literally in her countersuit, she claims that she had no money, but when she talks about this period of time, she gushes over the immense amounts of money that she was spending on her lifestyle. It just does my head in.
With the back rent, it's not like I'm trying to be unreasonable about it.
She has absolutely no remorse over any of this. She doesn't care.
It girls are startups, and startups need funding.
If anything, she's actually proud of the fact that this happened. I cannot make this up.
This apartment stuff has actually been great just to keep my name relevant. It's fun to have viral moments.
And I think Caroline's real life plan was starting to become shockingly clear here. Even in Florida, she was content to just occasionally shock people every now and then just so she stays in the news, all while extending the release date of her book back into oblivion and then appeasing anybody who gets mad about it with refunds if they reach out. At this point, the only thing that could get her to release this book would be an act of God, or at the very least, an act of Natalie Beach. So while Caroline had been busy this entire time traveling during the pandemic, not paying rent, and cosplaying underage characters on OnlyFans in her never-ending attempt to squeeze as much money out of her beleaguered audience as possible, Natalie had actually been writing a book. In mid-2023, Natalie announced her book, Adult Drama. She said that it would be a collection of 10 essays about her experiences over the years. This would include the essay that started it all, her 2019 piece, I Was Caroline Calloway, and it would also include one other essay reflecting on the situation, but the other 8 focused on Natalie's other life events and insights.
Personal essays offer a great opportunity to start with yourself and your own experiences and your own eyes, and then use that as a jumping off point to ask bigger questions.
And I was like, you know what? Let's see what we've got. So I actually took a 20-minute drive to the biggest bookstore near me, headed over to the section with the essay collections, which I did not even know they had. And what do you know? Even almost a year later, copies of Adult Drama by Natalie Beach are still in stores, impressively sitting right between Joan Didion and James Baldwin, 2 people without whom I probably would not have a career. And so yeah, I read the book, and honestly, I like it a lot. Now, if you came here specifically looking for like more Natalie versus Caroline drama, that is not what this book is. I know it's in the title, but that's not even what the book is trying to be. It says, through stories of heartbreak, odd jobs, political activism, existential crises, and low-rise jeans, Natalie Beach explores the high stakes and absurdist comedy of coming of age in a world gone mad. And if this is the premise, this book delivers. I mean, if you just have to read about Caroline, there is the last essay, though she doesn't go into too much more detail. It's more about how she feels after the fact. And there are a few bangers in there. Like, my ex-best friends and I used to joke that there's no bigger red flag than someone who begins a sentence with my ex-best friends. But really, from the way she described it, I did not go into this expecting I Am Caroline Calloway Part 2 Age of Ultron, and I'm kind of glad that's not what I got. I really liked Natalie's methodology of exploring topics like gender dysphoria, abortion, gentrification, all through her own small experiences, either dealing with or being around these constructs. The book doesn't really try to answer any questions, it sort of just asks them.
Not solve or completely untangle systems of oppression that are semi-visible, but to begin to get your arms around it.
And I was genuinely surprised by how well researched this book was. Like, it's a really good blend of personal opinion and interesting facts. If anything, it low-key kind of reminds me of my videos, or maybe it's just that my videos remind me of essays. Either way, I like the research, the perspective, and the overall presentation, even if the topics themselves were not things that I would usually be interested in. I guess it is literally exactly like YouTube. I'd almost recommend that Natalie tries getting into video commentary, but I mean, she already has a successful writing career, so. Anyway, let's talk about Caroline. You will never guess what happened in the very brief time span between Natalie announcing Adult Drama and releasing Adult Drama. Caroline Calloway actually published Scammer, oh my god, and she did it out of sheer spite.
I made this book because I was angry, and like, anger is a powerful motivator.
She was just so incensed at the idea of Natalie publishing a book before her that she started moving at light speed to get hers out first. 3.5 years late, or 3 to 6 years early if you ask her.
I wouldn't have released it in June if it hadn't been for that anger.
If anything is clear here, it's that even all these years later, Caroline's feelings about Natalie have not weakened.
I'm not surprised about the timing of Scammer. Caroline has always been extremely good at marketing herself.
And if the book itself is any indication, Caroline's feelings about Natalie have only gotten stronger and stranger over time. Much stranger. But first, a few issues concerning logistics. This book that I'm holding in my hands is not the copy that I purchased from Caroline Calloway's website. This is one that I had to find somewhere else on the internet and pay even more money for. And the reason I had to do this is because Caroline Calloway has still not sent me the book I ordered from her weeks ago. Even though she once claimed that pre-ordering was the only way to buy Scammer or whatever, it's available to purchase on her website even now. But only as a physical book, not an ebook?
We are being so stingy about who we give digital copies to, because I really want the first edition of Scammer to be like a physical product.
So unlike Natalie's book, which was just a Barnes & Noble trip away, the only way to order Scammer is through her site, and it has to be shipped to you. And seeing as Caroline herself is the one fulfilling these shipping orders, that's kind of problematic. Even with the book being released, people are still not getting their books. Caroline has not sent me so much as an email update about where my book may possibly be. I can only assume it's sitting around in her Florida residence. But you know, according to her Instagram, here are some things she has been doing since I paid nearly $100, including shipping. All right, let's take a look. Oh, 666,000 followers. That bodes well. Anyway, she's been heading back to New York for a vacation, hanging out with Adam22 for some reason, getting her hair done, coming up with ideas for a new book, literally anything other than sending out the book that and I cannot stress this enough, paid for weeks ago. And listen, $100 is not going to make or break me at this point, which is a privilege I'm extremely grateful for. And the reason I am extremely grateful for that privilege is because there was a time when the thought of having $100 to spend on anything, let alone a book, would have just been a bad joke. And the thought of not receiving something I spent $100 on would have been an actual nightmare. I just don't get how she's okay holding people's money hostage like this. Like, I get it because she's never been in that situation, but because I've been in that situation, I'll never get it. But yes, as of this video, I have officially been scammed by Caroline Calloway. What a very interactive story this has become. And Caroline, if you're watching this, which by the way, I know Caroline is watching this.
I am the biggest commentary community girly. I live for that. I love that.
I'm either going to need a book or $100 back, and I'll leave it up to you to decide. Anyway, I did still acquire it somehow because the video had to be made. Actually, it didn't have to be made. This video did not have to be made. It did not have to be watched, but I'm having fun and I'm grateful that you're watching it. But I did not have fun reading Scammer. I will say that much. So here's my quick breakdown. Was this worth the wait? Absolutely not. Was this worth the money? Absolutely not. Almost every single line in this book, and I mean almost every single line, is something that I have already either read or heard from Caroline Calloway somewhere else on the internet. It is so painfully obvious that she rushed this book out just to beat Natalie's release date, because so much of this book is just covering old ground. I've never seen a book press tour where you can just watch all the interviews and get every single bit of information that's in the book. Almost all of I Am Caroline Calloway has wound up in here, just split and expanded, so I was getting major deja vu. And then she also pasted a bunch of old college writing in here as well. So like maybe 75% of this book I genuinely did not need to read, but oh wow, was that other 25% a doozy. So Scammer as a book has the strangest quirks. The acknowledgements are 14 pages long because Caroline needed to, quote, beef up the book with some extra pages. There are grammatical errors literally everywhere. Like, it doesn't matter what Caroline says. About one thing, I am absolutely positive. Scammer was unconditionally and irrevocably not edited. Caroline tells us in the back of the book that she had 3 different people help edit this book, and I'm here to tell her that 3 different people lied to her several times. So very, very distracting to read a book just so chock full of easy to catch errors that literally one other person could have caught if they read it. Sometimes I felt like I was just reading an infinite tweet. Also, the book has no structure. It is all over the place. We're in the past, we're in the present. I don't even know where we are or why we're talking about this because we just talked about it 2 chapters ago, but it's on purpose, you see. Scammer is not a complete and linear memoir as And We Were Like will be. And speaking of And We Were Like, she keeps promoting her next book in this book, her next book, which she has not yet written.
My dream is always to make a memoir called And We Were Like. And in order to still be able to make that someday, I had to make Scammer short.
She even advertises like a DLC version of Scammer. I'm afraid you'll have to buy my expanded edition of this memoir someday if you ever want to watch me cover the concept of the campus novel. But what about this one? Why is this not a complete... Okay, I'm actually getting a bit heated. Take 2. You charge $65 for this book. To publish something incomplete, I shudder to think what the price of the expanded version will be. But yeah, reading a book and then basically getting interrupted with a sponsorship for a different book is just only Caroline Calloway. But yeah, the grammar, the promo, the weirdness. But that actually brings me to my last quick thought. The lies. Genuinely, there are some things in this book that are just so stupid. I'm like, that did not happen. Caroline, that did not happen. You are lying. And here's the thing, right? It's a book, right? You're obviously allowed to change things to make them more interesting. In fact, I would kind of hope you do. But she is marketing this as a real story, though. The Library of Congress page says as much. The events described in this book represent the recollections of the author as she experienced them. Dialogue is not intended to represent a word-for-word transcription, but it accurately reflects the author's memory and fairly reconstructs the meaning and substance of what was said. She, of course, forgot the apostrophe on the word authors, meaning that this book has achieved a feat I have never seen before. of having a typo before page 1. I genuinely think this is historical. So after I read that little bit in the Library of Congress page, I think it's pretty safe to assume that the things in the book are supposed to be real, right? So tell me why the things in this book include exchanges like this conversation that she apparently had with her old professor. Professor Lipsky, before you go, can I ask you one? Okay, wait, actually, this is kind of long, so I'm just gonna do my best dramatic reading here. Professor Lipsky, before you go, can I ask you one last thing? It was afternoon in Manhattan, but already dark outside the windows of Mattingly Hall's old Tudor library. I'd come in here to be alone. The other guests usually gathered in the great hall to drink after-dinner brandy beneath the Baroque portraits of lords. I steadied myself, hand against a row of books about Cambridge's history, and said, "Do you even think I'm able to... I guess what I'm trying to say is..." Lipsky was quiet as he waited for me to go on. "If you had to choose between me and Natalie, who is the better writer?" I asked it in a single breath. Lipsky paused before breaking into a deep laugh. "Caroline," he said. Why was he laughing? I thought I was going to pass out. "You were always the better writer. I thought you knew. All you ever had to do to write better than her was write." That didn't happen. I'll take things that didn't happen for literally all of the money in the entire world. I cannot explain to you how I felt when I read this for the first time. I put the book down, I stood up, and I walked around in a little circle. And then I sat down and I read it again. I have never read something so unbelievable that I stop reading and make it my life mission to prove that what I just read was fake. But that is exactly what I did. I found the proof. It's in this New Yorker article, and it's not even a paragraph, it's a parenthetical. But I found it. The New Yorker asked Professor Lipsky, the very real guy, same name, "Did you actually say that?" And the parenthetical says, in his email, Lipsky described the conversation differently, recalling that Calloway had seemed stuck in a project and that he'd advised her to stop looking over her shoulder. I told her what she had to do was write the book and not worry about other people or about other books. Not only does Caroline think "you were always a better writer than Natalie" is somehow fairly reconstructing the meaning and substance of what was said, but she literally brings up this fake quote again when she thanks him in the acknowledgements. "When you told me that I'd always been a better writer than Natalie, all I had to do was write, something clicked. And that something was your alarm clock, Caroline, because then you woke up." That man did not say this. Leave Lipsky alone. Who lies in the acknowledgements? What was the point of canceling your first book deal because you wanted to write a true book as your debut novel if you were just going to turn around and debut a novel that is not true? One so poorly written and just unbelievable that I read it and immediately and accurately ascertained that it was not true. Anyway, those are my first thoughts reading the book, but then I started thinking about it more and the second thoughts happened. And let's just say there's a lot more going on here. So one of the first revelations in Caroline's book actually goes all the way back to her time at Cambridge. Remember how she was kind of struggling to get in at first?
I applied to Cambridge 3 times and they rejected my application the first 2 times.
Well, according to Scammer, the third time wasn't a charm. The third time was a scam.
I forged a grade on my transcript. I changed a D+ that I got in high school, my senior spring, changed it to an A-.
As Caroline explains it, she was applying to different colleges within Cambridge each time, who she says weren't communicating with each other. So this allowed her to apply to a different college on her third try with a different transcript than the ones she submitted to the other two. And this different transcript had apparently been through a few edits.
Like I literally photoshopped it to like an A-, I think.
And I lied and I got in.
And if that's not frustrating enough, which trust me, it is, what she describes as forging a grade may have actually been a few grades, as you can find her in other interviews gleefully admitting that it didn't stop with the A-.
There were 2 Latin tests, like 2 Latin APs and 2 English Lit APs. And I had 1 5 and 1 4 for both Latin and English. And then I lied and just said that I got 5s on both.
And here's the problem. The only thing worse than the fact that Caroline lied her way into Cambridge is the fact that I have no idea if Caroline actually lied her way into Cambridge. See, I went to college, definitely not Cambridge, though funnily enough, my school is actually quite castle-like, and I too am considered a notable alumnus. Thank you, Google. But all this to say, I have experience submitting transcripts to a university, right? And if that process was anything like mine, which it probably was because we actually went to college at the same time, then there is literally no way that Caroline could have done what she's claiming to have done. Transcripts are requested from your high school and then verified by the university. So basically, Caroline could have submitted whatever she wanted. She could have put all 200s on her transcript, but it's just very likely that Cambridge would have called the fancy boarding school she went to in order to make sure that her real grades were consistent with the data she gave them. But here's the thing. I wasn't an international student, so I don't have any experience with that. And according to a UK university admissions consultancy, despite having verification processes for all students, quote, if it's a foreign exam board, it's much harder to do. If you're trying to speak to an examining board in Malaysia to say, did the student get this grade? It's much harder. But you know, I can't speak for Malaysia, but Caroline went to high school here in the United States, where we most certainly do have transcript verification systems. The college within Cambridge that Caroline applied to said the following: we cannot comment on individual students. However, we take statements like this very seriously. In other words, they told us nothing, so it's impossible to know for sure whether she's being honest here. But like, no matter what the truth is, I do genuinely think this still just kind of sucks either way. Like, if she's lying, this is truly a bizarre thing to lie about and then go on to actually brag about in the book. But I guess we could just throw it on the list of the other lies. But if she's being honest, the thought of someone's well-earned spot at school going to Caroline Calloway, of all people, is honestly just appalling, seeing as she scammed her way in. And regardless of the truth here, she's way too smug about all of this in the first place.
I do think it was a scam, but I don't feel guilty about it because I really think that it was what was best for the art I want to make.
But while the circumstances surrounding her admissions to Cambridge are questionable, things are only going to go downhill from there. If there's any saving grace at all in Caroline's I lied my way into Cambridge narrative, one could say, well, at least she managed to do the work once she got in, right? I mean, that's what Caroline says anyway.
To be fair, I didn't cheat while I was there, so I did do the coursework and I did get the degree. So like I was able to do the work.
Except for when she didn't, because Caroline also tells us that she didn't even bother to do the majority of her coursework.
Oftentimes I didn't finish it. Like I would turn in essays like that just weren't good or like weren't done because I very much understood that the only thing I would be graded on would be those exams at the end of the year.
And look, here's the thing. Anyone who went to college knows that there are good semesters and there are bad semesters. Once I failed half of my classes because I spent more time hyperventilating than doing my coursework. And seeing as Caroline herself was also struggling mentally, I am not here to blame her or anyone for missing a few assignments. But I think there's a difference between missing a few assignments and this.
I got a 2.2 and not a third. I also got a 50.0, which really shows that I nailed exactly the amount of work I needed to do.
Now, the phrases 2.2 and 50.0 didn't really mean much to my American brain, so I asked one of my friends who was actually currently attending university in the UK if they could translate, and they basically told me this is literally the verge of failure. And you know what? C's still get degrees at the end of the day, so even that is fair game. But one would hope, at the very, very least, that as an aspiring author, Caroline would at least use her position in Cambridge to try to learn a thing or two about writing. This is the same university, after all, that produced Sylvia Plath and William Wordsworth. But no, even that is too much to ask. What you call learning from classic literature, Caroline calls being infected by Cambridge's English course.
I knew what my voice was, and I didn't want it infected by the English course here.
She was literally, truly only there to party and spend her family's money for her Instagram. She never even bothered to write the darn book. And I have to wonder if she ever planned on it. And by the way, the whole lying your way into Cambridge and then doing poorly there turns into pure comedy when you think about how Caroline uses the fact that she went to Cambridge as proof of how smart she is.
A little part of me just wanted the intellectual validation.
Gaining intellectual validation from getting into the same place that you claimed you had to lie to get into. Make it make sense.
Nobel laureates lecturing and like your friends are like literally curing cancer. I think that really boosted my intellectual self-esteem.
And apparently while Caroline's friends were literally curing cancer, Caroline was literally annoying everyone at Cambridge. Despite what she portrayed online, people there didn't even really like her that much.
I was really unhappy there. People didn't take me seriously. They wanted to come to my parties. They wanted me at their parties, if only to like see their parties later documented on my Instagram. But all the while, they looked down on everything I was doing.
What is there to take seriously about someone who traveled across the world just to party at a school where everyone else is trying to do their work? Even looking back, the way she described Britain was just so very out of touch with reality that it bordered on comedy.
I live in a constant state of like embarrassing excitement here. Like my British friends, they've been forced to get used to it at this point.
Like honestly, Cambridge is just a school. There are students who went there who claim that she seriously misrepresented her time there to maximize on the foreignness and sell it to an American audience. Cambridge fanfiction is probably the most succinct yet accurate descriptor I've seen online, but as she details in her book, sticking out like a sore thumb was all well and good as long as she could get those sweet IG pics. She didn't even care that she was annoying anyone. I smartly doubled down on my own Americanisms, used the British contempt for them as cover. Crass, celebrity obsessed, unaware of social cues. Yep, that's me. I'm so goofy and oblivious. Now could you twirl her on the table one more time while I reshoot this photo with flash? I mean, how could you not take this seriously?
And my unwillingness to change just made me stick out more.
So those are the main takeaways from her book as it pertains to college. But really, the crazy revelations are just getting started. One of the biggest reasons I wanted to make this video in the first place was the fact that it all feels larger than life. Quite movie-like, some may say. And according to Caroline's book, we may actually be seeing it on screen someday.
I'm in LA because I am selling my life rights.
So one of the things that she goes into a lot more detail about in Scammer, and this may actually be new content, who knows, is the fact that she's been trying to turn her life story into a movie. Trying to get a movie deal before the book comes out is very Argyle of her, but for reasons unknown to Caroline, nobody seemed to be interested.
No one in LA wanted to meet with me for movie deals because they felt like Mindy Kaling's production team actually told me that they didn't think that I had anything to offer this story.
Nobody seemed to bite, that is, until she got the deal that would change it all.
I do have this very exciting movie deal behind the scenes.
So Caroline tells us that she's actually sold the rights of her story to none other than Lena Dunham, Golden Globe award-winning writer and creator of the HBO show Girls. Now, Lena Dunham and Caroline Calloway are honestly a match made in heaven for reasons that I don't even have time to get into in this video, but all Caroline wants us to know is that Lena has apparently written an entire movie script about her, which we're all going to be hearing about very soon.
I literally cannot talk about what's happening with the Lena Dunham script, but it will be announced soon.
Not only is this film all about Caroline Calloway, but apparently she'll even have her own minor cameo within the movie.
My role, my cameo, is as one of those actresses that I meet with that doesn't get the part.
But again, I'm left not knowing what to believe here. In fact, I have to be honest, the part she's referring to, meeting with the actresses who are supposed to play her, it's in the book. It's another thing that she's telling us actually happened, and oh man, I'm sorry, I'm gonna read it. Here are some of the interactions Caroline claims she's had with the actresses who are all apparently being considered to play her, an Instagram influencer from the 2010s that probably 90% of you have literally never heard of before this video. Chloe Grace Moretz was not just on time but early, prompt, professional, unpretentious, and gracious. When Emma Roberts and I FaceTimed, she seems so passionate about the project. And Maud Apatow is an honest-to-God friend. Margaret Qualley broke into a bright peal of genuine laughter, and we exchanged phone numbers and made plans for her to come over for dinner. Sydney Sweeney, when I told her my name, gazed sleepily at the flowers in my hair and said simply, obviously. I don't know which one is more humanly impossible for me to believe. The idea that Sydney Sweeney was ever being considered to play Caroline Calloway, or the idea that Sydney Sweeney knows who Caroline Calloway is. And seeing as Caroline is on record fabricating events to fit her narrative, I'm just going to go ahead and assume that almost none of this happened. I don't even know how to feel about the idea that Lena Dunham wrote an entire script about this. Lena Dunham had finally finished her feature-length script about my life, and yet we'd still never met in person. I mean, this could be the case, but again, needless to say, I'll believe it when I see it. Now, interestingly, Caroline also reveals that she wasn't the only one trying to tell the story. Natalie actually got a movie deal out of this as well, but according to Caroline, that deal is no more.
She positioned herself for an incoming movie deal as the only one capable of telling my life story because I was so unhinged, you couldn't trust a word I said.
But as you may have noticed at this point, the words according to Caroline do a lot of heavy lifting. But the way Caroline tells it is this: Netflix wouldn't be able to use her likeness or image unless she sold them the rights to do so.
We can't even use the words Caroline Calloway unless Caroline Calloway signs on to this.
So Natalie allegedly tried to pay Caroline to sign over these rights.
She tried to get me to sign away like my life rights to her for $15,000.
But Caroline is completely outraged by this because according to her, this would be almost nothing compared to how much Natalie stood to make if Caroline signed on.
I would find out later that Netflix was offering her $1 million, and if she couldn't get them attached, Netflix would only give her $100,000.
And you know, to the number of Natalie apparently being offered $1 million, I'm just gonna go ahead and bring up some actual numbers. Anna Delvey, the fake millionaire lady, she got a Netflix drama, and Netflix forked over $320,000 to her for the rights to her story. And that story was all over the place. So you honestly expect me to believe that Netflix somehow has $1 million to fork over, not even to the main character, of a story that most people don't even know exists? And not only that, but Caroline really makes this whole interaction with Natalie sound like it was this evil, conniving phone call.
She was trying to use my father's suicide to like take advantage of me.
Caroline says Natalie tried to guilt trip her into signing over her rights by any means possible. Here's how it's described in the book. If you signed, I'd forgive you. I was silent. Nat added, after everything you put me through during your addiction, bundling your life rights to my deal would be a really tangible way for you to, show up for me.
She offered me that 15 grand and her friendship and her forgiveness and her absolution in return for giving her my life rights.
I call cap. And I'm not even sorry about it because it's Caroline's fault that she can't be trusted. She did this. She has put herself in this predicament. Now, if you're wondering if we'll ever see Natalie's version of this project, I have no idea. In the past, I have seen her reference it, but movie projects get made and then canceled all the time. But Caroline claims that she is the reason for cancellation.
That deal of hers died at Netflix, the Ryan Murphy Netflix Natalie project.
Apparently, the articles coming out about Caroline Calloway and her book were just so good that Netflix read them and then ended Natalie's deal on the spot.
After my Vanity Fair piece came out, they killed the entire project.
Now, we'll look at the Vanity Fair article in question later, but if you're thinking to yourself, that sounds wildly improbable, then who are you going to trust? Your gut or Caroline's source?
A friend of a friend of a friend of a friend of a friend is the friend of the show, who was the showrunner.
I mean, how could you argue with that? Now let's dive a bit more into the parts of Caroline's book that concern Natalie, which is basically the majority of the book. So at the top of the nigh infinite list of grudges that Caroline seems to have held against Natalie this entire time is the fact that Natalie apparently tricked the world into thinking she was Caroline's ghostwriter.
The biggest misconception about me that persists is that I can't write and that Natalie was my ghostwriter. And people think this because Natalie is smart.
Here's the thing though, Natalie was Caroline's ghostwriter. She was hired to work on Caroline's book, and she was never credited anywhere among the promotional materials for said book. It was always going to be under Caroline's name. Sure, Caroline was also working on her own book proposal, but the arrangement they had is a pretty typical ghostwriter setup. But Caroline says that Natalie apparently misled everyone.
Natalie's piece is so smart in the way that it really leapfrogs from outraging detail to outraging detail.
Much like the way everything Caroline does is some sort of galaxy brain chess move, Natalie too set out to deceive the entire world.
I can't be anything but impressed by how masterful she crafted this essay.
In fact, on multiple occasions, Caroline outright says that Natalie takes credit for not just her work on the book proposal, but for everything.
She had actually taken credit for my work.
Taking credit for the brand that I built without her.
Taking credit for everything I'm doing.
For all my work.
However, this is absolutely ludicrous when you look at the fact that Natalie was so very clear about giving Caroline her credit. In fact, Caroline even admits this.
There's nothing I could sue over where she's like, I wrote the captions.
So how then did Natalie lie? Well, according to Caroline, Natalie tried to make it seem like she had also written the Cambridge captions in Caroline's place.
She focuses on us writing captions for the audience of bots, and then is very, very vague about when I go off and build the brand alone.
So instead of taking Caroline's word for it, because as you can see, that's never a good idea, let's take a quick look at the wording Natalie used that has Caroline throwing such a fit. Our arrangement came to an end as the summer did. Caroline flew to Cambridge. Caroline continued to post daily from Cambridge without my help, growing her fan base internationally and making new posh friends. Caroline really wants us to believe that this is Natalie taking credit for, and I quote, all her work.
I alone, with no help at all from anyone else doing the writing, that I alone write the captions about Cambridge that made me famous.
Yes, Caroline. Natalie never said that you didn't. And if the whole credit debacle seems like a sore spot for Caroline, it doesn't even come close to the biggest grudge she's apparently been holding against Natalie. Caroline's central rebuttal to Natalie's article is that apparently Natalie purposely left out Caroline's addiction.
In over 6,500 words, She doesn't use the word addiction once.
This is something she mentions multiple times throughout the book, multiple times in interviews, any chance she gets, basically.
She never mentioned my recovery. She made it seem like, you know, I was still the person that I was on pills.
Caroline refers to this as erasing my addiction from the record.
She basically like erases my Adderall addiction from the record.
She really wants you to know that her addiction was erased from the record.
Like, just erases all of that from the record.
And the reason Caroline wants you to know this is because she genuinely thinks her actions during this addiction don't equal her sober personality. And Natalie knew this and tried to mislead everyone, just like she did with the caption credit.
By presenting my behavior high out of my mind on amphetamines as my like sober personality, she mischaracterized fundamentally like the core of who I am.
But I have two really big issues with that. The first issue is the biggest, actually. This is her sober personality. According to Caroline, she's been clean for years at this point, and that's genuinely a good thing. And yet, the lies, the flakiness, the backtracking, the false promises, the spending of other people's money, the scam of it all of this has kept happening. The proof that Natalie did characterize you fairly is the fact that Caroline is still like this. And my second issue is that while I am sorry that she was struggling during the time Natalie described, you are ultimately still responsible for your actions, even if you are dealing with the disease of addiction.
Everything that she's mad at me for doing, I did 7, 8, 9 years ago, like high out of my mind on drugs. And everything that I'm mad at her that she did stone cold sober like within the last months to like 3 years.
It doesn't make Natalie a worse person than you because you've given yourself an excuse for everything wrong that you've ever done. And there's always an excuse.
I was just in amphetamine psychosis.
Also, can we talk about the fact that being mad at someone for not calling you a drug addict in a widely read article makes absolutely no sense? Like, Natalie didn't hide the fact that you took pills. It was actually mentioned in the article multiple times. But to go so far as to say Caroline was in the middle of an Adderall addiction, wouldn't that have just been like totally not her story to tell in the first place? In fact, Caroline is simultaneously angry with Natalie for not talking about her issues, but also angry with her for talking about them.
She did out the fact that I've struggled with suicide.
This is something Caroline actually mentioned in a statement right after Natalie's article had dropped as well. I think it's really messed up that Natalie revealed to the world that I struggled with suicide in the punchline of a joke. I wish she hadn't trivialized that pain, but this wasn't a joke at all. Again, here's what Natalie said. Back in LA, I bought us time with the publishers by writing a quarter of the manuscript by myself, but Caroline hated it so much that she threatened suicide if I wrote more. After she said that, I pulled away and watched in real time on Instagram as she counted the days until she missed the final deadline for our book contract. What about this sounds like a joke? Natalie wasn't sharing this because it was funny. She was sharing it because it was kind of a big deal. Making threats to take your own life in an attempt to coerce someone else into doing or not doing something is extremely serious and wrong.
The way I think about it and still am wrestling with is that was such a huge turning point in our relationship. How can I tell the story truthfully without including that?
So she can't mention Caroline threatening suicide, which is a form of manipulation that Caroline is still trying to hold over her head to this day. But also, Natalie should have mentioned addiction, which is something she kind of did mention, but she just didn't use the word. So I would say make it make sense, but at this point, there is no sense to be made. This is lunacy.
The one detail that, you know, is the thing that's been most dangerous to your survival in this world, and the literal reason that you don't have a father anymore. And she purposefully left it out.
And I think that deep down, Caroline knows that Natalie isn't even doing any of the things she's saying. There was genuinely nothing malicious about Natalie's article. It even says this: in Cambridge, I didn't see someone I wanted to be, but a girl living with one fork, no friends, and multiple copies of Prozac Nation. Now I saw Caroline for what she was, a person in need of help that I didn't know how to give. Not quite erasing someone's mental health from the record, but Caroline has to present Natalie's actions as being bad because then she gets to be the victim of the scenario. And just like the rent fiasco, the scenario in question is a problem she actually caused for someone else. And her best defense is a bold-faced lie. And that scammer, that's basically the book. There's really not much more substance beyond that at all. And yet Caroline wants us to believe that this book and all of its lies and pettiness and embarrassing grammatical errors has single-handedly saved her reputation. And that's because for some reason, the media is buying into this forced redemption arc.
Excited to read that.
The Washington Post called my first book a masterpiece?
The Washington Post actually did call Caroline's first book a masterpiece. I mean, to be more specific, they said Natalie Beach is a talented essayist with a promising career ahead of her. Calloway is a lunatic who has already written a masterpiece, which I do think changes the vibe a little bit, but I understand. The article is still basically like, yeah, sure, she misled people, fabricated stories in her book, and can't string together a coherent narrative to save her life, but it was entertaining, and like, yes, but actually no. Like, a train wreck is entertaining in the worst way possible, but I don't think anybody ever looked at that toxic waste derailment incident in Ohio and was like, wow, that was such a good book. Like, the author literally describes herself as, quote, a committed Calloway apologist. How did this even get published? And it's not even just the Washington Post.
3 different publications called my first book a masterpiece.
Are we reading the same book? Or, like, I know I didn't get mine straight from the source, but I'm pretty sure it's the same edition.
Did you see the New Yorker that just came out? Scammer is funny, engaging, and full of genuine insight.
Funnily enough though, Caroline quotes that part, but sort of leaves out the fact that they also said it feels rushed, probably because it was, and this self-published book is also largely unedited. Kind of not great things to be in your book review.
When they liked my book more and when they just like trashed Natalie's, I honestly, I felt the anger leave me.
Like, this is just objectively untrue. The New Yorker did not trash Natalie's book. They were critical of it, but they also said that Caroline's book was like, quote, a photo album uploaded to Facebook after a drunken night out. Loads of fun, but noticeably uncurated and occasionally ill-advised. So while I wouldn't quite count that among the pro-Caroline puff pieces, there were still plenty more where those came from.
I don't know how much Colleen Ballinger is paying her lawyers to get that like Vanity Fair puff piece, or James Charles and that awful Cosmo article.
This is stunning commentary from a person who, just 2 months prior, literally was featured in a Vanity Fair puff piece that desperately attempted to rehabilitate her image. But Caroline says that this is different because she didn't have to pay for the privilege.
I just did it by like having the right conversations with the right people in the right rooms.
Never mind the fact that the person who wrote the article is featured in Caroline's acknowledgments section and that they were posting gifts from Caroline on their Instagram months before the article came out. Though being friends with the journalist who published excuses about you in Vanity Fair might just explain why they breezed right past some of the more questionable moments. Like Caroline randomly sending them a video of herself in a thong doing, quote, this obscene darting thing with her tongue. If we learned anything from her OnlyFans debacle, it's that in Caroline Calloway's world, boundaries are nothing more than suggestions we don't listen to. But despite even this, the article does its best to present her as being quirky and silly instead of what she really is, which is wildly inappropriate and usually in the wrong. So many publications that interview her take this tone.
Caroline Calloway, the scammer who really does put the artist into con artist. Back to the kooky world of scammer Caroline Calloway.
I could not tell you where these kid gloves are coming from, but it really might just have to do with the fact that some of these journalists might not know who they're dealing with. After all, explaining the real issues with the Caroline Calloway cinematic universe kind of takes a while. If the media's reaction to Scammer has made anything clear, it's that Caroline doesn't just view this as a book launch. To her, Scammer is a brand relaunch in and of itself.
If you've had one scandal, have as many more as you can, because otherwise that one scandal will define you.
Much like she did at Cambridge, she's found a new version of herself that works for people and results in somewhat less criticism than she's used to receiving, so she's leaned into it full steam ahead, despite it being wildly inauthentic. But this time, it's the old if you can't beat them, join them approach.
I knew fighting it would not work. So really, as an experiment, I thought, okay, I'm gonna lean into this.
But the issue with this new problematic fave era is that for once, Caroline Calloway is kind of behind the times. Like, the problematic influencer trope is pretty much dead. See Tana, Jeffrey, Trisha, they've all moved on, either to total obscurity or to podcasting, which is basically just total obscurity but with a microphone. And honestly, we really don't see any new versions of this influencer because everyone kind of figured out that it's not cute to be basically the worst person. Newer influencers are generally not trying to appear unlikable. In fact, I'm glad this trend is dead because this personality type is absolutely insufferable. None of these people should have ever been popular in the first place. And like, when your media inspirations are Trump and the Kardashians, I think you might be doing things wrong.
You really need to play into the Trumpian, Kardashian influence information overload principle.
She's really proud of that one, by the way.
There's this Kardashian, Trumpian principle of like information overload.
But you know what? The principle is only somewhat effective. The strategy has its limits, and I think Caroline Calloway has just about reached hers.
As your name recognition increases, the barrier to entry of what you have to do to be written about lowers every time.
Yes, Vanity Fair, The New Yorker, Washington Post, she got all the press. I won't sit here and deny that. But instead, I'll just sit here and offer a simple question to the viewers at home. Did you know Caroline Calloway published a book? Because I certainly didn't. The only reason I recognized Caroline Calloway's name at all was because I barely kinda remembered her from the workshops. I didn't even know the Natalie article had happened. So at this point, it might be time to rethink this press strategy. Also, I could not get through this video without taking a second to mention this, but I absolutely hate the way Caroline Calloway treats her cat. Like, she has a cat named Matisse.
I also have some things I want to, thank you. I want to show you about Matisse. Look at this.
And it's annoying enough the way she uses him to appear sympathetic in almost every video she's done recently.
My best friend is this cat.
And I mean like every single video interview.
She has 4,000 cat hats.
Wow, 4,000 cat hats? I wonder how many months of rent that equals. But above all, I really just hate the way she treats him.
Look, see this? Like, shouldn't a survival instinct kick in?
Like, why are you swinging the cat around by his neck? Why are you so pleased with yourself? Your baby is suffering. Anyway, that has nothing to do with anything, but I felt like if I didn't get it off my chest, I was just literally going to explode. Please let me know if I'm overreacting, because maybe I just don't understand how cats work. Anyway, I feel like it's impossible to ask who is Caroline Calloway without later wanting to ask, why is Caroline Calloway? My question throughout most of this video has been clear. How does Caroline Calloway actually happen? And I think a lot of it boils down to certain personality traits she just can't seem to shake. And of these, the biggest has to be her raging persecution complex. There always seems to be a difference between Caroline world, in which only Caroline Calloway lives, and reality, in which things actually happened. And in Caroline world, there's only ever one reason people don't like her. Misogyny.
I say this in the book that hating extremely online pretty women is the last guilt-free prejudice our world has left.
Not just misogyny, mind you, like a limited edition version of misogyny that she experiences because she's just so gosh darn pretty and popular. I wish I was making this up.
I just think we're really okay with hating thin, pretty, young girls with a bunch of followers on Instagram because we think their lives are really easy and we kind of want to see them fail.
And part of what makes this so difficult to criticize is that she is correct. She's saying things that are true, things that you cannot disagree with. That way you can't really criticize her. Though in this case, wanting to see women fail online might be more of a self-report. Seeing as she said in her I Am Caroline Calloway essay, do you know how many hours I've spent silently seething at my iPhone screen, blistering with jealousy at the women I've never met who I think deserve to fail because they've had an easier life than I have? I'm also frothing at the mouth to see those bees fall from grace. Internalized misogyny be damned. I mean, I genuinely don't know how to respond to that. She's kind of just telling on herself at this point. But still, the heart of what she's saying is obviously true.
We just think of women who want fame and money and power as a little bit evil, and I want all those things, and I think I should be able to claim those desires with as much confidence as a man.
Basically, she's arguing that if we support women's rights, we should also support women's wrongs, but has she considered that she may be girl bossing too close to the sun? Like, jokes aside, yes, the way some people talk about Caroline Calloway online is appalling, but I'm going to be honest, out of all the think pieces and Reddit threads and obscure YouTube comment sections that I have gone through, and trust me, I have gone through so many of them, I have to say that the majority of people I've seen who think that Caroline Calloway is a little bit evil think this because Caroline Calloway is a little bit evil. I really don't know how else to put it. Like, seriously, the way she spends other people's money and just hops from controversy to controversy like it's the most trivial thing in the world, that's enough to make anybody dislike you. But Caroline would have us think it's all just people who don't want her to succeed. She even talks about her book deal this way.
When you get yourself into a situation where you're like, you've signed a contract, you didn't realize how much you were going to be like prevented from speaking your actual truth, and it's like, okay, now what do you do?
I'm sorry, but the book deal was not preventing her from speaking her actual truth. Caroline herself very deliberately chose to present a version of the actual truth to publishers that wasn't the actual truth for the same reason that underpins the entire video.
You could either sell like a niche addiction memoir and get less money, or you could make yourself into like a manic pixie dream girl, and I wanted the money.
I'm not really sure that I've ever genuinely seen her take responsibility for anything at this point. In fact, she leans so far into the people are being misogynist angle anytime she's criticized for anything that it starts to sound like she's just bragging about being conventionally attractive and blonde and whatever else she thinks she's being punished for. Like, listen to how she talks about herself from an intellectual standpoint.
Coming to Cambridge, it was definitely an academic achievement thing.
God, not this again. Okay, sorry. Just go ahead.
Growing up being young and blonde and conventionally attractive, you just sort of felt like people gave you the Elle Woods treatment. They just severely underestimated your intellect.
But at the end of the day, according to her own book, she did not, in fact, achieve the academics required to get into Cambridge. And that's why she lied her way in. I would argue that that is actually very blonde of her, but in more of an Elizabeth Holmes sense, illegally blonde, so to speak.
I'm too pretty and too much of a party girl to be smart, even though I'm literally the one who's at Cambridge.
Make it make sense. But of all the things she complains about, you'll never guess who Caroline thinks committed the most egregious example of sexism against her. Why, none other than Natalie Beach, of course.
She really activates this powerful cultural stereotype where that's a really sexist cultural stereotype that's like pretty equals dumb, ugly equals smart.
And as we saw with Natalie and the whole caption credit / erasing from the narrative debacles, this is something she always does. She has to rewrite reality so that she always winds up as the sympathetic protagonist, even if she is literally the one antagonizing people. And seeing as she's been wrong in nearly every situation we've examined thus far, there's been a lot of rewriting of history. I feel like she's very much bent the truth past its breaking point. Another huge answer to the question, how does Caroline happen? Is privilege. You cannot tell the story without talking about the immense amount of privilege she has. The same one she complains about having. Blonde, conventionally attractive, white, which I think is extremely relevant here. Like when Caroline was asked how she felt about potentially taking someone's spot at Cambridge with her forged transcripts, her answer was quite telling. Even though race was not mentioned, she immediately jumped to point out that actually what she did wasn't that bad because there weren't even that many people of color here in the first place. So it's not like she took a black person's spot.
The year that I matriculated in 2013, it was 1 out of every 10 students that was Black or an ethnic minority. It was pre the George Floyd riots.
Yeah, Caroline, 1 out of every 10 students was a person of color because they were too busy letting people like you in. But it's pre-George Floyd, so that makes it okay. Also, it's really interesting that she referred to the George Floyd protests as the George Floyd riots. It kind of makes me wonder who she was getting most of her information about the situation from. But don't worry, I'm not calling Caroline Calloway racist. She is.
I am racist and very ashamed of it.
Actually, she's calling everybody racist.
I think everyone is very racist.
And I genuinely don't even have time to unpack that botched interpretation of critical race theory, so I'm not going to try to. But back to those black kids who never got into Cambridge.
Do you think I took someone's spot in 2013 knowing that 1 out of every 10 was someone who might say was more deserving? I think most people would say no.
It's funny because I think most people would say yes, but that just tells me that Caroline Calloway and I are not speaking to the same people.
George Floyd protests, I feel like I am not the person to speak on it.
Unless, of course, you're bringing it up completely unasked for in order to absolve yourself for lying your way into Cambridge. Great. But what do I expect from someone who used Black Lives Matter as an excuse to push back her book release date even further? Yes, I wish I was making this up too. And you know, this isn't to say that Caroline doesn't think she has white privilege at all.
I was so blind to white privilege when I was at Cambridge.
She'll let you point out that there's no way she could have gotten away with almost anything she's ever gotten away with if she was a person of color.
My whiteness plays into my persona.
But just don't point it out too hard or you'll just sound like a bunch of angry black people.
People who penalize me for existing in a privileged body, I sometimes feel like they're exorcising a kind of anger and hatred that isn't really about dismantling racism.
She just oscillates between feigning self-awareness and hiding behind her usual "I'm being oppressed for being privileged" rhetoric that everything she says about the topic just starts to sound like an overdrawn joke.
I began my journey with racism in 2018.
Like, that is genuinely the stupidest sentence I've ever heard. And she knows it. This is genuinely funny to her.
We stand a woke
king. So like, I love that for you.
Between soft launching anti-Semitic memes on her Twitter before backtracking and blaming Disney, to her posting a joke on her story about dressing up as Anne Frank for OnlyFans, I feel like woke is probably the last word I would use to describe Caroline, and I do not in fact love that journey for her. Anyway, I could make a whole 2-hour-long video just how I feel about not only Caroline's exemplification of white privilege, but the way it plays into all of this nonsensical media reaction that we've seen towards her. I mean, really, it's part of the reason she got famous in the first place. Like, dark academia and the academia aesthetic are all extremely exclusionary because all of its references are overwhelmingly white. Oxbridge, Harry Potter, European classical literature, like, exclusion is the aesthetic. Yes, I look good wearing it, but I was still going to call it out. But instead of that can of worms, I kind of want to pivot to the other form of privilege we're dealing with here. Despite everything you've learned about her in this video, all the little details that we put together, Caroline genuinely wants you to believe that she did not come from money.
My parents were like lower middle class.
Yes, she went to a private boarding school for her entire life, literally private elementary, middle, and high school.
Really good boarding school, sort of like the Eton of America. Graduated from there.
But just because she went to Phillips Exeter doesn't mean her parents had money.
My family's not rich.
They only had enough money to buy her a studio apartment in the West Village while she was a college student at New York University. The West Village, also known as literally the most expensive area of the most expensive city in the entire United States of America, because she wanted to feel like a Hollywood actress. I didn't live in student housing like the other freshmen because over the summer I had read a tabloid that reported that Dakota Fanning, also part of the incoming NYU class of 2015, would be renting her own place somewhere separate from the dorms. Like, this goes beyond privilege. Caroline has never even had to hold down a traditional job.
I went straight from Cambridge to being professional full-time Caroline Calloway.
But like, that's a brand that she built. It's not because of her family.
Just because I like rich bitch things, it doesn't mean I myself am from that.
But also, even as my father spent extravagantly on me, I still felt like he owed me. What I wanted was for him to meet my emotional needs, and what I got was a studio downtown and a bunch of cashmere hand-me-downs. You know, just the typical extravagant spending of the lower middle class. So middle class that it's like, forget holding down a job, she's never even had to apply for a job.
I don't even know how to format a resume. I've never written a cover letter. Like, I'm in a very different world.
So like, I think you get the point. There's a mismatch between how Caroline presents herself depending on what her goals are. She's very wealthy when it benefits her, but when it doesn't, there's not a dollar to her name. I mean, she couldn't even make money during the pandemic as an influencer. One of the only jobs that had built-in job security during the pandemic. Also, if you're wondering whose fault it is that everyone thinks she's rich, it's not Caroline's fault for mentioning it 100 times in 100 different ways anytime she gets the chance. It's Natalie's fault.
Natalie, my ex-best friend, would later do a great job convincing other people that I am just this spoiled, privileged.
I couldn't make this up if I tried. Sometimes though, Caroline realizes that she can't win this privilege debate, and like all scenarios where she can't win, she just resorts to trying to make everyone else look worse. And in this case, that means trying to make Natalie seem richer.
She told the truth, but lied by lying by omission.
So you may have gathered from Natalie's Cut article that she was working for Caroline because she needed money, but that's where you're wrong. Caroline has the real story.
We don't fit as perfectly into that narrative of the pretty dumb face and, you know, Natalie, who had less power but was doing all the work, and like that sort of complicated dynamic that she tried to present.
According to Caroline, and you're not ready for this, I promise you're not ready for this. The dark truth that Natalie hid in her article was the fact that Natalie's parents owned a bigger house than Caroline's.
I've been to her house in New Haven, and like, it's nicer than mine. Like, her family is richer than mine. The very premise of her story is that I had everything handed to me.
How could Caroline be in the wrong if Natalie's parents had a bigger house? This changes everything. Here I was just spending the last few minutes examining how Caroline literally had everything handed to her, but Natalie also had money. She must have just been working that job for fun.
She's the Nepo baby. She grew up in the mansion in Connecticut. I grew up in the hoarder home in Virginia.
Yeah, the hoarder home in Falls Church, Virginia, which Wikipedia describes as, and I quote, the richest county in the United States. But Natalie lives in Connecticut.
Natalie's first writing job before this essay in the Cut was being the book critic at O Magazine. She got that job because her aunt is the editor-in-chief.
Here's the thing though. I have no idea if this is true because I never do when it comes to Caroline. But even if it is, Natalie still had to work. And that was kind of the premise of the power imbalance within the relationship she described within her Cut article. Regardless of whether Natalie's family has money, which they absolutely do. You can tell by some of the things she talks about in her book. But clearly, they weren't just forking it over to her hand over fist. Why else would she be working for Caroline for $20 an hour in New York City? For fun? This is yet another part of Caroline's narrative that has changed between I Am Caroline Calloway, the essay, and the release of Scammer, the book. In her essay, she says, I had 2 friends in New York. When I said Natalie was the only one who needed the money, I meant it. In one of the private emails that Caroline published for no reason, Natalie says, I've spent the last year broke, owing the IRS and my parents money, working awful jobs. Caroline knows this is the case. She admitted it at the time, but she's now trying to present this as if Natalie and she were in the exact same situation.
Her little sister was like literally at Brown.
Be that as it may, both Caroline and Natalie were at NYU, which is also an extremely prestigious university. It's like Caroline believes that if she can just get you to hate Natalie for whatever reason, any reason at all, then maybe, just maybe, there's a chance that you will actually like Caroline.
She accurately guessed what version of herself would bring her the most professional gain.
And if she can get you to believe that Natalie lied about anything, then maybe she can get you to believe that Natalie might just have lied about everything.
She was like, this bougie, meaning me, like Caroline has everything handed to her.
A sentence that literally never appears anywhere in the article. Man, if Caroline Calloway spent as much time writing books as she does rewriting history, then she might have actually released her book on time. But also, if it sounds like Caroline is just trying to make this 2 white girls pointing fingers at each other like, no, you're more privileged, then don't worry, because she wants to be so cognizant of not falling into that trap.
I want to be so cognizant of not falling into the trap of making this 2 white girls pointing fingers at each other, being like, no, you're more privileged.
So at least there's that. I think another piece of the Caroline puzzle is the fact that she is genuinely delusional. Like, I myself try to be somewhat delusional because I actually think it's good for the soul in healthy measures, but Caroline really just brings this to a new level. My favorite Caroline delusion is the idea that everything she's done online is just some esoteric form of performance art.
I've been called lots of things, and I'm sure I'll be called lots of things in the future. And I hope I will, because art is meant to be disruptive when it's done well.
And you know what? My sleep schedule was quite disrupted while working on this video, so maybe there's some artistic merit here after all. But you cannot convince me that she's happy being called half the things that she is. And what of all the good art you can create without being generally unhinged and unreliable? Anyway, here's another. Caroline Calloway seems to have a vastly out-of-touch concept of the level of her own fame. It's like her fake it till you make it days have carried over from her fake follower era.
I have a Reddit that has the ferocity and activity of something that you would expect from like an A-list star, like Taylor Swift.
Yeah, 15,000 followers there, just like Taylor Swift, whose subreddit is literally in the top 1% of all subreddits by size. But was Taylor Swift ever in the top 0.3% of OnlyFans creators? Didn't think so. Sorry, Taylor, I think you lost this one. But no, like, Caroline Calloway genuinely thinks that she's famous.
On a pie chart of what made the cut thing go viral, I think my nonstop promotion leading up to the 10 days before would be the biggest slice of that pie.
But is the pie in the room with us right now? And you know, you might have noticed, well, she sure does have a lot of interview appearances, but honestly, most of the podcasts that interview her nowadays are absolutely tiny. I haven't really seen Caroline Calloway pop off on YouTube since, well, whenever this video goes up, hopefully. More delusions center around her book, which despite the glaring quality control issues, she seems to think is the first step in building her literary legacy.
I just tried to write a book that would be interesting in 100 years from now.
I'm sorry, but if I wasn't caught up with the Caroline Calloway lore long before I read Scammer, her book wouldn't even be interesting now. It's borderline incomprehensible as it is. Speaking of the book, this one might actually be my favorite.
I've never needed to use anyone else's name, anyone else's photo, anyone else's life story to sell my books, but my own.
She wouldn't have even released a book if it wasn't for Natalie. At this point, Natalie is living in Caroline's head rent-free. And Caroline would know a thing or two about living rent-free, wouldn't she?
I don't need her at all. I could write about any part of my life without Natalie, but the only parts of Natalie that people care about are the parts about me.
Yeah, so just for fun, I went ahead and just marked down a pink sticky tab anytime that Natalie was mentioned. And yeah, I literally had to go back and purchase more sticky tabs in the middle of reading this. And if this doesn't give you an idea of how convoluted and just messy this book is structurally, I don't know what does. She even mentions Natalie while thinking other people in the book's never-ending acknowledgments. Working with Nat and then being betrayed by her made me believe that all artistic partnerships came with the coiled tick of an observer, feeding, waiting, biding their time. But you reparented me, art-wise. Dear God. I don't know if you can see it, but that's actually what I wrote right there in the margin. Just, dear God. The Natalie obsession is for real crazy though. Like, I just found out today that since Natalie's book was announced, it sold less than 500 copies total. This is why you shouldn't be a terrible person and sell out your friends. This week's scammer broke the 6,000 copy mark at $65 a book. I'm sorry, but 500 copies? Again, this is not true. This is just not true. If Natalie had only sold 500 copies at that point, there's no way on God's green earth they would still be selling it at Barnes & Noble almost a year later. People are buying the book, Caroline. There's probably around 500 copies of this just floating around local library systems. But what would Caroline know about having books in libraries or on Amazon or anywhere other than a shady website that you're running by yourself? But above all, I think Caroline's biggest delusion is just the idea that she really hasn't even done anything that wrong if you think about it. Like, come on.
If someone has a problem with me, they can text me. And if they don't have my phone number, then they don't really know me well enough to be making comments on who I am as a person or the inner workings of my business.
I think you get to make comments when the business in question has failed to deliver the goods you paid for with your hard-earned money, but what do I know? I've just been scammed out of $100. But honestly, like, who hasn't scammed people at this point? Like, come on.
I just hate how unfairly I'm judged for things that I think a lot of people have done.
Part of me almost wants to know what it's like to move through life in such an oblivious way. Like, I almost wish I could experience it, even if just for a day.
I think of myself as being very professional. I don't bring my emotions or my tears. I don't cry in my place of work.
I think I would almost rather there be tears in her place of work than cat hair, but what are you going to do? Much like the financial status of her childhood, another thing that Caroline cannot seem to make up her mind about is whether or not she's okay with the way people see her. On the one hand, she calls herself a scammer every chance she gets.
Lots of scammers are in jail. Not this one. That's why I'm the best.
We know the Trumpian Kardashian principle of the Federal Trade Association. We get it. But at the same time, she also seems to get legitimately bothered when anybody else calls her a scammer.
I've scammed people. Find a person who I've scammed. Find one person.
Yeah, that person would be me. And yes, I already made this joke in the beginning of the video, but it's a long video, and so I was hoping you wouldn't notice.
She's not a scammer, I promise.
Except that I am.
And it kind of raises the question, is Caroline Calloway actually a scammer? Has she done anything illegal? She certainly doesn't seem to think so.
When you Google my name as a law-abiding citizen.
I mean, she kind of thinks so.
Like, not paying your rent is illegal, but like, the rent was late.
But she doesn't really think so.
The people who come up are like literal criminals.
And unlike literal criminals, Caroline was just messing around.
It wasn't like I was never going to pay it.
Except for that countersuit she filed in which she very clearly tried to never pay the rent. But again, one has to ask, is she a scammer? And I mean, I don't know. Is taking people's money stealing?
Like, I've never stolen a single dollar from anyone.
If only she had just stolen a single dollar from me. But at least it wasn't the $40,000 she had to pay back to her landlord. But at the same time, if you think she's a scammer, that's okay.
I don't mind being called a scammer because, I have lied.
But like, they weren't bad lies, you know what I mean? Like, they were the kind of lies that good people tell.
I've never hurt anyone. I think I'm a really good person.
And at the end of the day, even if Caroline Calloway was a scammer, I mean, I think we can all agree on one thing. At least she's not Anna Delvey.
I hadn't broken the law, and I hadn't embezzled millions of dollars, and I was still grouped with these scammers.
But yeah, I set out to answer the question of whether Caroline Calloway was a scammer, but I think the real question is Caroline Calloway ever going to face any real consequences for scamming? And I believe we can all guess the answer to that one.
None of my messes are criminal.
Maybe not now, Caroline. Maybe not now. But once I get the FTA involved, better watch out. I'm not even sure if I've ever genuinely hated another person. My beauty sleep is way too important to me to let the thought of anyone keep me up at night. And I don't think Caroline has ever really used the word hate. But going through this story, I honestly think I can say that she has shown me what it means to hate somebody. Because the way she talks about Natalie is just not normal. On the one hand, she says she's such a talented writer.
I'm going to fix the lines that she wrote. not fix them because they're bad. They're amazing. I'll worsen them.
But on the other, she's not really the best writer.
Natalie's not like, I don't think she's the best writer, but she's not a bad writer. She's not unbearable to read.
But really, this all boils down to Caroline's lack of faith in her own writing abilities.
I don't want to use her words, and I'm a capable writer.
Sometimes she doesn't seem to think so at all. My whole life, I avoided writing books by avoiding first drafts. I couldn't tolerate my own mediocrity for more than a few pages at a time. And I think this insecurity leads to things like the unbearably cringeworthy exchange that she fabricated with her old college professor to prove that she's a better writer than Natalie. And like, this isn't the only thing she goes back and forth on when it comes to Natalie either. On the one hand, Caroline considers Natalie to be a vengeful, conniving user.
I don't think it's right the way she used me.
But sometimes she doesn't seem to think that at all.
What she did was absolutely 100% the smartest, rightest thing she could do.
Out of all the interview footage I watched, every word that I read, the one thing Caroline can never seem to find peace about is Natalie Beach.
I really felt like, the world was rewarding her with like, not just money, but like praise and just like attention for like being really and snaky.
Like, to be clear, she's furious with her. She'll even admit as much if you ask her, even when she's being chill.
I do feel a little bit of anger. And when I'm being honest, I do feel betrayed as well.
But on the other hand, sometimes she genuinely seems to want to not be angry at Natalie.
I don't feel that way anymore. I'm really excited to be living my life.
But no matter how hard she tries, there is no life without Natalie at this point. Natalie Beach has become the narrative framing device through which Caroline has started to view her entire life. There were so many times that I had to cut out random Natalie mentions out of Caroline's interview clips because they had nothing to do with what she was actually talking about. I mean, again, the pink tabs speak for themselves. There was actually a point where I thought to myself, oh wow, she's actually managed to go a few pages without mentioning Natalie, only to flip the page and see Natalie's name just right there at the top. And I seriously think it's because Caroline hates Natalie for what she did. Some of the content in Caroline's book is just flat out disturbing. Like, there's an entire chapter in there just dedicated to fantasizing about hurting Natalie physically. I do have this one daydream about Natalie that comes close to violence. Sometimes I imagine I have a bow and arrow and it's aimed at Natalie's heart. Instead of a kill shot to the heart, I'm going to slit her jugular because I want to hit someplace while still giving her enough time to see herself bleed out. I'm not interested in her pain so much as her understanding that I caused it. I imagine the terror in her eyes and the metallic kickback of adrenaline and relief when she realizes the only thing I've forced her to endure is the slightest breeze against her exposed neck, a muscle leaping in her jaw. Oh, okay, well, it's all fine then because I guess you didn't slit her throat. Like, are you kidding me? This is not normal. The way she talks about Natalie throughout this book is just disgusting. Any and every opportunity she gets, she puts her down. I hooked up with a fat guy who looked like Natalie instead. Since New York University, she's gotten an adorable potbelly and chopped off all her hair into a pixie cut. Caroline has since tried to pretend like this line was neutral, but seeing as she later goes on to say, this guy's face looked eerily like a Hans Holbein of King Henry VIII, but his body was identical to hers now. I think it's pretty clear that this is intended to disparage. Like, seriously, who talks about someone like this? After Natalie had sex with my friend from Exeter and made it look so easy to pleasure herself into oblivion with men, and I can't emphasize enough how hard I genuinely should not be reading this out loud. And believe it or not, I am actually cleaning it up. This is so very weird. This is so far beyond the things that Natalie was sharing in her article. Natalie talked about Caroline's behavior to share her own experiences. Caroline is pretending to do the same thing here, but it's not the same thing at all. She even mentions that when Natalie opened up to Caroline about experiencing assault, Caroline was apparently turned on by this and decided to reenact it later with her boyfriend. And here's the thing. Caroline herself has experience with assault, and I'm not here to arbitrate how anybody gets to process their trauma, but that has nothing to do with this. Why in the world would you publish this? As Natalie described her topless and abused body, I could feel myself getting turned on. I didn't mean to be turned on, but I clenched with desire even as tears streamed down my neck. Again, I am cleaning this one up. And you know, it actually gets worse because this is not just in the book either. This is how Caroline talks about Natalie in real life. Remember that Vanity Fair article? Caroline tells the reporter the same story. Calloway then proceeds to tell me the same disturbing story that Beach told readers, with a few additional lurid details. Why are you giving previously untold details about someone else's assault to a journalist. Why are you sharing with a journalist that you found it hot? The reporter did not even ask about Natalie. In her book, she even accuses Natalie of, quote, lying about the timeline of her assault to make me look worse, which is a crazy claim to make in a published novel. Probably one of the many reasons Scammer could never be traditionally published. I seriously think that something is broken here when it comes to Natalie, because this is just some of the weirdest behavior I've ever covered in a video. Any and every opportunity she gets, no matter who she's talking to, no matter what she's talking about, it's all just a chance to try to make Natalie feel bad.
Yeah, I was a person in my 20s, but I'm glad I grew up to be not her, and because it just doesn't pay to live like that and to just like betray people.
Natalie didn't betray anybody by speaking up about her personal experience. If anything, I've learned from this research that Natalie may have actually gone out of her way to paint Caroline in as flattering of a light as possible, which is no small task, let me tell you. And you know what? Part of me almost wants to believe that Caroline knows this. Because if you really listen to what she says about Natalie, the problem is not that Natalie spoke up. It's when she spoke up. The problem is what happened after she spoke up, and the fact that it's something no one could have predicted, yet you can never really recover from.
I wasn't even angry. I sort of like, I was so deep in the grief that I was desperate for it. Like, I wanted her to stop hurting me. I wanted her to stop attacking me. I wanted her to stop taking credit for my work. I wanted her to stop making me feel like I wanted love, like, you know, like my dad had just been taken away.
I genuinely hope she's able to work through some of this, because this revenge fantasy that she's living here seriously seems exhausting. Honestly, I don't think Caroline will ever achieve her goal of producing an actual masterpiece until she can find internal motivation from something other than the rage she feels at a former friend who moved on a long time ago. In many ways, I think Caroline Calloway is stuck. The more footage I looked at, the more I realized she just kind of loops.
He is not the brightest button on the cardigan.
Everything she's ever said, I have seen her say somewhere else.
Matisse isn't the brightest button on the cardigan.
And listen, this can happen when you're giving interviews. There are only so many ways of telling the same story. But in my experience watching, there's just something extremely off-putting about the way Caroline goes through the motions.
There really was a time on the internet where like the standard Instagram post was like an aerial shot of avocado toast, and you would like put the Valencia filter, and then like the caption would just be #Valencia.
I started to feel like sometimes I actually was watching performance art, but it just made me feel really weird because I felt like Caroline was not in on the act.
It would be like an aerial photo of your avocado toast.
It was like aerial shots of your breakfast, and the caption would be like #Valencia.
And the caption would be like #Valencia.
She even tells the exact same story and the exact same words twice in the same 20-minute talk. And no matter how many interviews you're giving, that is not normal.
Everyone was posting those aerial shots of their breakfast, and their captions were #Valencia.
That was a different clip from the first one I showed. Even the way she talks to the reporters in the interviews, recorded years apart, are just kind of uncannily similar.
That was the best intro I've ever heard in my entire life.
Can I hire you to just like introduce me to everyone in my life?
Forget parties and first dates. Can you do that to me every morning?
Like, not just this radio show, but like we could just whenever I'm meeting new people.
It's like once Caroline figures out how to get a reaction out of people, she just keeps hitting that button any chance she gets. But I think there are some stories that you don't want to live on repeat.
48 hours after this article comes out, my father's rotting body is found. Suicide.
2 days later, my dad's rotting body is found. Suicide.
My father's rotting body is found.
My father's rotting body decayed there.
And then it hit me. How is there even 14 hours of interview footage in the first place? Why does she keep doing this? It's never anything new. Most of the time she doesn't even let her interviewers get a single word in edgewise. No one is really watching this. But if you follow these interviews chronologically, you'll realize that she's looking for something each time, but she only ever gets a piece of it. Any new excuse or moniker that a journalist gives her, she assimilates into her vocabulary and self-mythology. Somebody says she's a scammer, okay, now she's a scammer. Somebody calls her a performance artist, well now her whole career is just performance art. Whenever she finds something that sticks, she sticks with it. And at this point, it's almost like she's just a collection of other people's reactions to her. I think Caroline Calloway is the actual endpoint of being chronically online. I mean, at this point, I think this probably applies to literally all of us, but that's neither here nor there. The term chronically online might be the best descriptor that you can come up with for someone like Caroline. Part of what made this video difficult to research is that there's just so much Caroline Calloway lore in the first place.
I try to put up between 3 and 18 posts a day.
Damn. And that's on his stories.
No, that's grid posts.
Whoa. And it's not just the interviews or the rate at which she puts out content, but the level to which she engages with it as well. Like agreeing with a comment where someone calls Natalie a hoe, or featuring in a Vice documentary where she calls up people who criticize her online during her social media break. These are just not healthy or productive areas to devote your energy to. As we've seen, Caroline's breaks never really seem to last long, and when she's gone, she's never really gone. But despite this, I honestly think an online break would do her a lot of good. I'm just not sure if that's something we're ever really going to see at this point.
I really used the content that I made online to help me process my emotions, my experience of the world.
Of course, Caroline would call me a sexist misogynist for even suggesting that she's oversharing though, because as she tells us in her book, oversharing is a sexist verb used to demean women memoirists. So there is that. Even though it's worth noting that this is exactly one page before she goes on to describe getting turned on by her best friend's assault. Like, at the very least, the way she talks about Natalie is nothing if not oversharing. So I seriously think she should create like an internet-free, hour-long podcast interview-free, just Natalie-free zone, and just write. I would be interested to see what comes out of it, because at this point, I'm not even sure if she knows what the end result would be. Okay, so this has been a lot. Let's recap. Once upon a time, there was a girl named Caroline Calloway, and she only wanted one thing.
I really always felt like I was meant and destined to contribute to society by going to these worlds, living in these worlds, and then writing about these worlds.
But the problem was she wanted that one thing so much that she stopped imagining what life meant outside of that one thing.
I've just never felt like I would be of service in any other way. I just always felt like this was the way I was going to make something important.
And if you tie all of your self-worth to the one thing, you're going to start caring about that one thing more than yourself.
I just don't care what's best for me as a person.
People would go on to call Caroline a lot of things, and some of those people would be right. There would be plenty of mistakes for Caroline to make and just as many second chances. But it doesn't mean that Caroline's original goals were wrong.
I just think that those books will make other people who struggle with madness, but also suicide. I think I can make art that can help them.
It's not very easy to help other people when you haven't taken the time to help yourself first.
My expectations for my own happiness are like not that high.
Helping yourself is easier said than done though. Struggling with your mental health is not easy, and going through life feeling like you're just defective by default makes it hard to even try sometimes.
Like if I designed a person, like I would not design them the way that my heart and mind functions.
But sometimes trying is all you can do. You have to figure out what life looks like outside of people's expectations, outside of labels for you, valid or otherwise.
I really think like the best thing I can do for my readers, for future generations, is just to like put my own happiness aside and just make the best books that I can.
You have to be somebody outside of what you can do. Because if you're not, then you're gonna find out the hard way that if you lose that one thing, you wind up with nothing at all. And you don't want to be that easy to break.
She's taking away from me the one thing I do care about, which is the ability to tell my story.
Because when you're that easy to break, you're going to wind up giving other people way too much power over you.
If she tells the world who Caroline Calloway is, what purpose do I even serve in this world?
So for Caroline's sake, I genuinely hope she finds that purpose. Anyway, let's end it on a lighter note, because that was like crazy. Let's check in with Natalie. Needless to say, her opinion of Caroline is nowhere near as strong as Caroline's opinion of her.
A way of viewing the world that I take issue with is that when one of us succeeds, the other one will necessarily fall. That's just not how it works.
Yeah, the Natalie versus Caroline thing is completely one-sided at this point. I have literally never seen Natalie post so much as a negative word about Caroline in the last few years. In fact, I haven't even really seen her post about Caroline at all.
Maybe I would feel tethered to her a little bit more if I spent more time on the internet.
Caroline may have made Natalie her main villain, but I genuinely don't even think Caroline's going to be in Natalie's next story.
I don't follow Caroline on social media. I don't read what she writes. Our friendship is over.
It's crazy how much more sense things make when you're not filtering them through Twitter logic. In a way, Natalie sees the situation for how ironic it really is.
We thought we would get famous together one way or another, and I don't think it turned out the way we thought. In a certain way, that's what happened. Not to say that I'm famous or anything.
I couldn't help but compare her mentality about fame to Caroline's here.
I think I'm pretty famous now. I'm like, did you read Did you read last month's Vanity Fair?
But alas, whereas the release of Natalie's book motivated Caroline to publish her debut novel early, the release of Caroline's book isn't really going to motivate Natalie to do so much as turn a page.
She's really talented and a wonderful writer. I think that it's best for me to not read the book. I don't read news articles about her just because it was a painful time in my life.
She seems to have the whole life outside of Caroline thing on lock, which makes sense if you read her book. There is genuinely so much more life to live.
I work in my garden and I have my friends and my husband and my pets and my interests that are outside of what happened when I was in my early 20s.
A lot of people accuse Natalie of just using the Caroline story to launch her own writing career, and yeah, it worked. Career launched.
I got, the great honor of being read widely, and I get to live in this beautiful house with my partner. I crave the sweeter elixir of recognition, not fame.
And if you're wondering what she would do differently, she's not. Natalie basically got everything she wanted out of this.
I have no regrets about how things went down in 2019. All I want is to be read generously and for my work to touch other people.
So I guess in some ways this video technically counts as a happily ever after?
My personal life and where I am right now, I'm super happy.
Well, almost.
Are you happy? No. I've never been happy though.
Oof. Okay, the end. So yeah, that was Burnt Book, or How I Fell for Caroline Calloway's Never-Ending Scam. Fun fact about this video, I wrote, produced, and edited it all by myself. Please don't ask me why. Fun fact about my life though, I'm genuinely grateful that I get to do this as a job. If you watched this video all the way to this point, you are pretty much the reason I wake up in the morning excited to do my job. Thank you for watching doesn't even cut it at this point. Thank you for existing and going through this journey with me. I wasn't gonna bring it up, but this is actually the 1-year anniversary of my return to YouTube. And I can confidently say that coming back to YouTube has been the single greatest decision I've made in the last couple of years. I've come back happier, healthier, and as this video shows, with my best content ever. And I'm still getting started. If you thought this video was great, you have no idea what's coming next. Though honestly, at this point, in this moment, neither do I, because my brain is just #Valencia. Anyway, sorry the video's over. I know you wanted to watch it till the end of time because it's the most fun you've ever had in your entire life or whatever, but don't worry, I'll upload another one soon. Or never. I guess you'll just have to subscribe to find out. Okay, thanks, bye!
The values that are just inside of me. And those values are being honest, being kind to my friends, and just to fans and to everyone. Oh, compassion. I didn't even say that.